Picture a world where cities rise for the very first time, where towering ziggurats pierce the sky, where gleaming bronze tools spark revolutions in art and war, and where distant empires, separated by seas and mountains, begin to weave the first threads of a global network. This was the Bronze Age, humanity's first great era of interconnection, a time when civilizations from Mesopotamia to the Aegean, from the Nile to the Indus, began to shape the course of history in ways that still echo today. It was an age of staggering innovation, brutal conflict, and breathtaking artistry, a time when the foundations of our modern world were laid piece by piece in bronze and stone. What made this era so extraordinary? How did scattered kingdoms and fledgling city-states transform into the cradles of civilization we remember? The answers lie in 35 pivotal moments, unforgettable turning points where human ambition, ingenuity, and sometimes sheer desperation changed everything. These aren't just dry facts from a dusty textbook. These are the dramatic stories of kings and queens, artisans and warriors, explorers and traders who dared to imagine a new world. From the rise of the first superpower in Mesopotamia to the mysterious collapse of entire empires in a single generation, the Bronze Age is a saga filled with triumphs, tragedies, and mysteries that still baffle historians today. This journey will take us across continents and centuries, uncovering the moments that defined an epoch. We'll stand in the shadow of the Great Pyramid when it was still new, witness the fury of battles that reshaped kingdoms, and decode the secrets of forgotten scripts that unlocked the voices of the past. Every twist and turn reveals something astonishing, whether it's the sudden appearance of the world's first written love poem, or the devastating eruption that may have inspired the legend of Atlantis. So if you've ever wondered how humanity took its first steps toward the modern age, or why these ancient stories still captivate us, you're about to discover why the Bronze Age isn't just history, it's the origin story of us all. Around 3,300 years before the Common Era, humanity took a leap that would change everything. In the rugged highlands of Anatolia and the fertile river valleys of the Near East, an extraordinary discovery was unfolding: the secret of blending copper and tin to create bronze. This wasn't just a new material, it was a revolution waiting to happen. Imagine a farmer swinging a bronze sickle through golden wheat, the blade holding its edge far longer than old stone tools. Or a warrior gripping a bronze-tipped spear, its deadly point gleaming in the sun, lighter, sharper, and deadlier than anything that came before. Bronze didn't just make life easier, it reshaped societies from the ground up. The magic began in fire. Early metalworkers mastered smelting, heating crushed ore in clay furnaces until molten metal pooled at the bottom. It was finicky work: too little heat, and the ore stayed stubbornly solid; too much, and the furnace cracked. But when they got it right, the payoff was immense. Villages near tin and copper deposits suddenly became hubs of innovation, their workshops buzzing with artisans hammering out axes, chisels, and jewelry. Trade routes exploded as distant cultures sought these prized metals, weaving the first threads of a connected world. One of the most tantalizing clues from this era isn't a weapon or tool, but something far more mysterious: the Vinci symbols. Found etched into clay tablets in southeastern Europe, these strange markings may be the world's earliest proto-writing, predating even Mesopotamian cuneiform. Were they simple property marks or the first stuttering steps toward written language? Either way, they hint at a society complex enough to need record-keeping, fueled by the surplus that bronze-made efficiency created. This was the true spark of the Bronze Age, not just a new metal but a cascade of consequences. Stronger tools meant more food, which meant larger populations. Deadlier weapons meant bigger armies, which meant empires, and those fragile trade routes, they'd soon become the lifelines of civilizations, carrying not just goods, but ideas that would shape humanity's story for millennia. The age of stone was over. A brighter, harder, far more unpredictable era had begun. By the time the third millennium before the Common Era dawned, the fertile lands between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers had become a crucible of civilization. Here in Mesopotamia, the world's first true cities rose from the mud Uruk, and Lagash, their names echoing through history like thunder. These weren't just clusters of huts. They were sprawling metropolises with tens of thousands of citizens, monumental temples, and bureaucracies sophisticated enough to track everything from grain harvests to the movements of stars. At the heart of it all stood Uruk, a city so grand its walls stretched for nearly 6 miles, crowned by the gleaming white ziggurat of Inanna, goddess of love and war. This stepped pyramid wasn't just a temple, it was a statement. Towering over the flat plains, it shouted to all who saw it. Here was a people who could marshal thousands of workers, move mountains of earth, and reach for the heavens. And reach they did. The Sumerians didn't just build, they invented. Their greatest creation, cuneiform, the world's first writing system. Picture a scribe pressing wedge-shaped marks into wet clay, recording tax receipts, royal decrees, and eventually, something even more astonishing, literature. Which brings us to Gilgamesh. The Epic of Gilgamesh isn't just the oldest surviving work of fiction. It's a mirror held up to Sumerian soul. Here was a king, 2/3 god, 1/3 mortal, raging against death itself. His quest for immortality, fighting monsters, grieving his fallen friend Enkidu, descending into the underworld resonates across 4,000 years because it asks the same questions we still do. What makes a life meaningful? How do we face loss? Meanwhile, Earth thrived as a mercantile powerhouse, its docks bristling with ships carrying lapis lazuli from Afghanistan and cedar from Lebanon. The city's royal tombs, unearthed in the 1920s, revealed treasures that still take the breath away: golden helmets, lyres adorned with bulls' heads, and the haunting remains of sacrificed attendants, laid to rest with their kings in a final, terrible display of power. Lagash, though less famous, pioneered something equally revolutionary: social reform. When the ruler Urukagina took power around 2,350 years before the Common Era, he slashed taxes, protected widows and orphans from exploitation, and even decreed that the rich couldn't force the poor to sell their donkeys or houses. It might be history's first recorded attempt at economic justice, proof that even in the shadow of ziggurats, humanity was wrestling with questions of fairness and power. What's staggering isn't just that these cities existed, but how modern they feel. Cuneiform tablets reveal lawsuits over faulty copper sales, schoolboys punished for talking in class, even a complaining letter from a merchant to his lazy son. The Sumerians had accountants, astronomers, and brewers. Their beer was so prized it became a form of wages. And when they looked at the night sky, they didn't just see stars. They mapped constellations, tracked planetary movements, and laid the groundwork for mathematics itself with their base 60 system, which still echoes in how we measure time today. Yet for all their brilliance, the Sumerian city-states were locked in endless rivalry, their armies clashing over water rights and trade routes. It was a pattern that would repeat across the Bronze Age, progress and conflict hand in hand. But in that tension, these cities forged something immortal, the blueprint of civilization itself. Every time we write a letter, debate laws, or gaze up at a skyscraper, we're standing on foundations laid by people who, 4,000 years ago, dared to imagine a world beyond the mud-brick horizon. While Mesopotamia's city-states rose and clashed, another civilization was taking shape along the banks of the Nile, one that would outlast them all. Around 3,100 years before the Common Era, a warrior king named Narmer, or Menes as later Egyptians would call him, did the unthinkable. He took the warring kingdoms of Upper and Lower Egypt, the narrow river valley to the south and the sprawling delta to the north, and smashed them together into a single, unstoppable force. The Narmer palette, a 2-foot slab of carved green siltstone discovered in the ruins of the ancient city of Hierakonpolis, tells this story in striking detail. On one side, the king wears the white crown of Upper Egypt, clubbing a captive. On the other, he dons the red crown of Lower Egypt, striding past decapitated enemies. This wasn't just propaganda, it was the birth certificate of a nation. What made Narmer's unification so revolutionary wasn't just the scale of his conquest, but what came after. For the first time, a centralized bureaucracy emerged, with scribes tracking the Nile's floods, managing granaries, and collecting taxes in an early system that would evolve into history's first civil service. The Egyptians even pioneered a postal system, with runners carrying messages stamped with official seals up and down the river. And then there were the mastabas, flat-roofed, rectangular tombs that would later evolve into pyramids. These weren't just burial chambers, they were statements of permanence, built from mud bricks so sturdy that some still stand today. The Narmer palette itself hides fascinating clues. Behind the king's triumphant pose, a servant carries his sandals, a symbolic act showing Narmer as both conqueror and sacred figure, walking barefoot on holy ground. The intertwined necks of mythical serpopods leashed by attendants may represent the forced unity of the two lands. Even the palette's original purpose is revealing. It was a grinding slab for mixing ceremonial eye paint, linking warfare to ritual. Every stroke of its carvings whispers that Egypt's greatness wasn't just won on the battlefield, but in the minds of its people. This was no fleeting empire. Narmer's successors would build on his foundation for 3,000 years, their culture so stable that when Julius Caesar arrived millennia later, they were still worshipping the same gods, writing in hieroglyphs and mummifying their dead. The secret lay in that first moment of unification, a lesson etched into the palette stone. To endure, a civilization must master not just the sword but the symbol. Among the many breakthroughs of the Bronze Age, few capture the imagination like the invention of the wheel. But its true story is far more surprising than the popular myths suggest. While children's books often depict some lone genius rolling the first wheel into history, the reality is messier, slower, and altogether more fascinating. The earliest evidence of wheeled vehicles doesn't come from a single eureka moment, but from the muddy workshops of Mesopotamia around 3,500 years before the Common Era. Picture the scene: a Sumerian craftsman chiseling axles for heavy wooden carts, their thick, solid wheels cut from planks and lashed together with leather, groaning under the weight of grain or stone. These weren't the sleek, spoked wheels we know today. They were clunky, inefficient, and revolutionary all the same. Before their arrival, goods moved on sledges, flat platforms dragged over rollers or greased runners. Sumerian reliefs show the stark difference: sledges laboring under temple stones, teams of workers straining against ropes, while nearby, wheeled carts glide forward with relative ease, pulled by sturdy oxen. Why did it take so long for such a seemingly simple idea to emerge? The answer lies in the wheel's hidden complexity. A functioning wheel isn't just a round object, it requires a stable axle, precisely fitted bearings, and a flat, even surface to roll on. Without paved roads, early wheels often sank into mud or cracked on rough terrain. The Mesopotamians solved this by building raised processional routes and trade highways, some lined with bitumen for durability. The impact rippled across the ancient world. Wheeled vehicles didn't just move goods faster, they transformed economies. A single cart could carry what once required a dozen donkeys, slashing transport costs and fueling long-distance trade. Soon, Mesopotamian merchants were hauling copper from Oman, timber from Lebanon, and lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, precious cargoes that now flowed along newly connected routes. But here's the twist: the wheel didn't spread uniformly. In Egypt, where the Nile served as a natural highway, boats remained the dominant transport, and wheels were rare until much later. Meanwhile, in the Eurasian steppes, nomadic cultures adapted wheels for mobile homes, the precursors to horse-drawn chariots that would later reshape warfare. The real genius of the wheel lies in what it reveals about Bronze Age innovation. This wasn't just a tool, it was a system demanding new infrastructure, new animal husbandry techniques, and new social organization to build and maintain roads. Like bronze itself, the wheel was a catalyst, turning isolated settlements into nodes in a vast, humming network of exchange. And though those first wooden wheels have long since turned to dust, their legacy still rolls forward every time a truck rumbles down a highway or a suitcase spins through an airport, proof that some inventions truly stand the test of time. Buried beneath the sands of Mesopotamia for over 4,500 years, the steel of the vultures tells a story of blood, bronze, and the birth of modern warfare. Unearthed in the ruins of ancient Knossos, this shattered limestone monument, its surviving fragments now displayed in the Louvre, captures the brutal clash between the rival city-states of Lagash and Umma around 2,500 years before the Common Era. Unlike earlier tribal skirmishes, this wasn't just a raid for plunder. It was history's first recorded war fought over something shockingly contemporary, a disputed border. The steel's carvings reveal a chilling sophistication in destruction. King Enotum of Lagash, depicted larger than life, leads phalanxes of helmeted soldiers, their shields locked in a wall, their bronze-tipped spears bristling like the quills of a porcupine. Above them, the gardening Knossos hovers, a net filled with captive enemies, divine approval for the slaughter. On another panel, vultures pick at the corpses of Umma's fallen, giving the steel its grim modern name. What makes these images revolutionary isn't just their brutality, but their evidence of organized, large-scale combat. These were no disorganized mobs, they were disciplined units moving in formation, their bronze weapons gleaming under the Mesopotamian sun. Bronze changed everything. The swords and spears wielded here weren't the crude copper tools of earlier centuries. By alloying copper with tin, smiths created blades that held their edge, armor that turned aside blows, and arrowheads that pierced leather shields. A single bronze helmet, like those shown on the steel, could take weeks to craft, hammering the metal over a wooden form, its cheek guards and neck flaps proof against slashing attacks. But this technology came at a cost. Tin had to be hauled from distant mines in Afghanistan or Anatolia, making bronze a luxury only powerful states could afford. War wasn't just fought with bronze, it was fought for bronze, with victors seizing mines and trade routes to fuel their next campaign. The Lagash-Umma conflict centered on the Gaidina, a fertile plain both cities claimed. Cuneiform tablets detail generations of disputes, broken treaties, sabotaged canals, and Umma's alleged trampling of the agreed boundary. When Enotum finally crushed Umma's forces, his victory inscription boasted of stacking corpses, like mounds of grain, then imposed a new border marked by ditches and stelae. This was more than pride, it was the dawn of territorial sovereignty, the idea that land itself, not just people or resources, could be owned and defended. Yet the steel also hints at war's psychological toll. One fragment shows a row of bound captives, their faces etched with resignation, being led past the bodies of their comrades. Another depicts a grieving mother from Umma, her hands raised to the heavens, a rare glimpse of the human cost behind the triumphal carvings. Even Enotum's boasts couldn't mask the cycle of violence. Within decades, Umma would revolt and the killing would begin anew. What resonates today isn't just the technology or tactics, but how eerily familiar it all feels. The same themes: border disputes, resource wars, the interplay of divine justification and raw power, still shape conflicts across our modern world. The steel of the vultures stands as a stark reminder. The battlefields may change, but the reasons we fight, those were forged in bronze long ago. On the windswept plains of southern England, around 2,600 years before the Common Era, an engineering marvel began to take shape, one that would align with cosmic rhythms older than civilization itself. Stonehenge didn't rise overnight. Its construction spanned centuries, each phase revealing the growing sophistication of Bronze Age minds grappling with stone and sky. The earliest version was a simple circular ditch and bank, but by its zenith it became something extraordinary, a celestial computer in stone. The massive sarcens, sandstone blocks weighing up to 50 tons, were dragged from quarries 20 miles away, their surfaces painstakingly smoothed and fitted with tongue and groove joints, a technique usually reserved for woodworking. But the real mystery lies in the smaller bluestones, some no taller than a person, yet far more perplexing. Geochemical analysis reveals these bluestones came from the Preseli Hills in Wales, nearly 150 miles away. How did they get there? One theory suggests glacial movements during the Ice Age carried them close to Salisbury Plain, but another, more daring, proposes a monumental effort by Bronze Age builders. Picture teams hauling these stones overland using wooden sledges and rollers, then loading them onto rafts to navigate rivers and coastal waters. The journey would have taken months, demanding precise coordination and an unshakable belief in the stone's sacred power. Some bluestones bear marks of healing rituals, hinting they were thought to possess magical properties, perhaps tied to the springs and outcrops of their Welsh homeland. But Stonehenge's true genius lies in its alignment. At dawn on the summer solstice, the sun rises directly over the heel stone, its rays slicing through the monument's center. The winter solstice sunset, meanwhile, frames perfectly between the tallest trilithons. These aren't accidents. The builders encoded their understanding of the cosmos into stone, creating a calendar that tracked seasons, lunar cycles, and even eclipses. Recent laser scans reveal carvings of daggers and axes on the Saracen symbols, linking the site to a broader ritual landscape. Nearby, Durrington Walls housed a massive wooden henge, its avenue leading to the river Avon, suggesting processions that mirrored the sun's path. Stonehenge wasn't alone. Across Europe, from the Ring of Brodgar in Orkney to the Carnac stones in Brittany, similar monuments rose, all echoing a shared fascination with astronomy and the afterlife. What binds them is more than stone, it's the human impulse to reach beyond the earthly, to mark time in a world where the heavens dictated survival. The blue stones, with their otherworldly hue, might have been the key. When struck, they produce a resonant, bell-like tone, a sound possibly used in rituals to commune with ancestors or deities. This was more than architecture, it was a bridge between worlds. The effort to build Stonehenge, the thousands of hours, the lost lives, the sheer audacity of its design speaks to something profound. In an age before written records, these stones were their scripture, their science, and their song. And though we've mapped their alignments and traced their origins, the whispers of why they matter still drift across the plain, carried by the same winds that once filled the sails of those who dared to dream in stone. On the sun-drenched island of Crete, around 2,000 years before the Common Era, a palace emerged that defied every expectation of its time, the sprawling complex of Knossos, heart of the Minoan civilization. Unlike the rigid, fortress-like structures of Mesopotamia or Egypt, Knossos felt almost alive, its corridors twisting like a living organism, its walls pulsing with vibrant frescoes of leaping dolphins and lithe bull dancers. The palace wasn't just a royal residence, it was a labyrinth in both design and function, with over 1,000 interlocking rooms spread across multiple levels, connected by staircases that seemed to deliberately confuse. Storage magazines bulged with giant clay jars, each capable of holding hundreds of gallons of olive oil, wine, or grain, evidence of a redistributive economy where priests and priestesses, not kings, controlled wealth as divine intermediaries. The frescoes tell a story of a society obsessed with movement and nature. One iconic panel, the Prince of the Lilies, shows a youth striding confidently, his crown of peacock feathers and elegant sash suggesting ritual authority rather than military might. Another, the bull-leaping scene, captures acrobats somersaulting over charging bulls, a sport or sacrament that may have inspired the later myth of the Minotaur. But here's the twist. Archaeology reveals no evidence of human sacrifice or monstrous hybrids. The labyrinth likely got its name from the labris, a double-headed axe symbol found everywhere in Knossos, representing divine power rather than a maze. The Minotaur tale, spun by later Greeks, seems to be a metaphor for Athenian unease with Minoan dominance, a cultural memory of tribute paid to a sophisticated island power. What's truly astonishing is how Knossos stood up to disaster. Crete sits on a tectonic knife edge, and the palace suffered repeated earthquakes, yet the Minoans rebuilt each time, engineering solutions that still impress. Columns tapered downward instead of upward, absorbing seismic shocks like modern base isolators. Walls used flexible wooden frameworks within stone, allowing them to sway rather than collapse. Even their plumbing was revolutionary. Terracotta pipes with fitted joints carried fresh water and waste, some sections designed with deliberate curves to slow water flow and prevent buildup. The throne room at Knossos offers another clue to Minoan uniqueness. Unlike the towering, intimidating seats of other Bronze Age rulers, this throne is human-scaled, flanked by benches where advisors might gather. The walls are painted with griffins, mythical guardians, yes, but their relaxed, almost decorative poses suggest protection rather than domination. This was a theocracy, but one where power seemed to flow through ceremony and trade as much as coercion. By 1,600 years before the Common Era, Knossos lay in ruins, likely toppled by the cataclysmic eruption of Thera. But its legacy whispers through history, in the later Greek ideals of harmony and athleticism, in the very concept of a palace as a cultural hub rather than a barracks. The Minoans didn't just build a labyrinth, they wove a vision of civilization where beauty and resilience walked hand in hand, where even earthquakes couldn't shake their belief that humanity could dance with the forces of nature, and for a glorious few centuries they did. Carved into a towering slab of gleaming black diorite, the Code of Hammurabi stands as one of history's most startling declarations, justice written in stone. Around 1,750 years before the Common Era, Babylon's ruler didn't just conquer cities, he sought to govern them with ruthless clarity. At the top of the 7-foot stele, Hammurabi himself is depicted receiving the laws from Shamash, the sun god of justice, a scene hammered into rock to underscore their divine authority. Below, in neat cuneiform script, sprawled 282 laws covering everything from property disputes to medical malpractice, each one a window into a society grappling with order in ways both shockingly familiar and profoundly alien. Take the famous eye for an eye principle. Law 196 states plainly, "If a man destroys the eye of another man, they shall destroy his eye." But the code was far more nuanced than simple retaliation. The same law continues. If the victim was a slave, the penalty was half the slave's value paid to the owner. Social status mattered. Strike a freeborn man, lose a hand. Strike your father, lose both hands. Yet woven between these brutal penalties were surprisingly progressive ideas. Doctors faced fines for botched surgeries, 10 shekels for a nobleman's failed operation, but only 2 for a slave's, establishing one of the earliest known medical liability standards. Builders whose houses collapsed and killed occupants could be put to death, a stark incentive for quality construction. The code's attention to commerce reveals Babylon as a hub of bustling trade. Laws fixed prices for everything from ferry rides to barley, preventing inflation during shortages. Silver loans couldn't exceed a 20% interest rate, while grain loans capped at 33%, an ancient attempt to curb predatory lending. Merchants accused of cheating customers faced public trials by river ordeal. Thrown into the Euphrates, their fate decided by whether the currents spared them. But the stele itself is as fascinating as its text. Diorite, imported from distant Magan, modern Oman, was nearly impossible to carve, chosen specifically to deter alterations. The bas-relief of Hammurabi and Shamash wasn't mere decoration. It visually tied earthly law to cosmic order, a theme echoed in the code's epilogue. "Let the wronged man stand before my statue and read my inscribed words." So he may know his rights. Copies were placed in temples across the empire, making justice accessible, at least to those who could read. What's often overlooked is how the code balanced brutality with compassion. Dowries were protected to ensure widows weren't left destitute. Adopted children couldn't be disinherited without cause. Even runaway slaves had rights. Harboring one was punishable, but helping capture one earned a reward, 2 shekels precisely quantified. Hammurabi's genius lay in understanding that laws must reflect a society's values and fears. His code didn't just punish, it sought to deter, to instruct, to unify a fractious empire under shared rules. Though its punishments seem draconian today, the principle it embodied, that no one, not even kings, should be above the law, would echo through the ages, from Roman jurisprudence to the foundations of modern legal systems. The diorite stele, now resting in the Louvre, remains a monument to humanity's eternal struggle to balance justice with power, one chiseled line at a time. For centuries, Egypt had seemed invincible, protected by deserts, nourished by the Nile, and ruled by pharaohs who claimed divine authority. Then, around 1,650 years before the Common Era, everything changed. From the northeast came invaders unlike any the two lands had faced. The Hyksos, a Semitic-speaking people whose very name meant rulers of foreign lands. They didn't just raid, they conquered, seizing control of the Nile Delta and establishing their capital at Avaris, a strategic port city where the Pelusiac branch of the Nile met the Mediterranean. For over 100 years, the 15th dynasty of Hyksos kings would rule Lower Egypt, not as crude barbarians, but as sophisticated rulers who forced the once insular Egyptians to confront a terrifying truth: their military technology was obsolete. The Hyksos' edge lay in 2 innovations that revolutionized warfare: the horse-drawn chariot and the composite bow. Unlike Egypt's cumbersome ox carts, Hyksos' chariots were lightweight marvels of bent wood and leather, their spoked wheels allowing blistering speed on the battlefield. Each chariot carried a driver and an archer armed with a composite bow, layers of wood, horn, and sinew laminated together under tension, creating a weapon with terrifying range and penetrating power. Excavations at Avaris reveal workshops where these bows were mass-produced, their curved profiles echoing those later adopted by Egyptian forces. The psychological impact must have been devastating. Imagine Egyptian infantry, trained for close-quarters combat with spears and shields, staring down a thundering line of chariots, arrows whistling toward them before they could even raise their weapons. Yet the Hyksos weren't mere destroyers. At Avaris, archaeologists have uncovered a thriving cosmopolitan city where Egyptian and Near Eastern cultures blended. Frescoes depict Minoan-style bull leaping, while cylinder seals from Mesopotamia mingled with scarabs bearing the names of Hyksos kings like Apophis. Their rule introduced Egypt to new crops like olives and pomegranates, advanced bronze working techniques, and even the vertical loom, which revolutionized textile production. The irony is profound. These so-called foreign invaders dragged Egypt into the broader technological and cultural currents of the Bronze Age. The turning point came when the native Egyptian rulers of Thebes, chafing under Hyksos' dominance, launched a war of liberation. Initially outmatched, they studied their enemies' tactics, adopting and improving the very chariots that had crushed their armies. By the reign of Ahmose I, the Egyptians had developed their own elite chariot corps, pairing them with reformed infantry units, a combined arms approach that would become the hallmark of the new kingdom's military machine. When Ahmose finally stormed Avaris after a grueling siege, he didn't just reclaim Egypt. He forged a new empire, one that would stretch from Nubia to the Euphrates, its battle hymns echoing with the grudging lessons learned from defeat. The Hyksos didn't just invade Egypt, they transformed it. Their legacy lingers not in plundered treasures, but in the unlikeliest of places: the rush of chariot wheels in Tutankhamun's tomb, the curve of an archer's bow in Ramses' Roman II battle reliefs, and the grudging admission in Egyptian records that sometimes survival demands borrowing from those you once called enemy. Around 1,600 years before the Common Era, the Mediterranean world shuddered under a force more destructive than any army, the eruption of Thera, a volcanic cataclysm so immense it makes modern eruptions look like campfire sparks. Today, the crescent-shaped remnant of Santorini barely hints at the island's original form before it detonated with the energy of hundreds of atomic bombs. Ash blotted out the sun across the region, while tsunamis, some waves towering over 100 feet, crashed into Crete's northern shores just 70 miles away, smashing ports, drowning crops, and choking harbors with volcanic debris. The Minoan heartland, so dependent on maritime trade, found its lifelines severed in an afternoon. Archaeology paints a vivid picture of the disaster's immediate aftermath. At Akrotiri, a thriving Minoan outpost on Thera itself, excavations reveal a town frozen in time, multi-story buildings buried under 60 feet of pumice, their vibrant frescoes perfectly preserved. One haunting mural shows a flotilla of ships sailing between islands dotted with villages, possibly a depiction of the Cyclades before the eruption. But it's the spring fresco that lingers in memory, swallows darting among blooming lilies, a scene of such delicate beauty it's jarring to recall these colors were sealed beneath apocalyptic ash. Thera didn't just erupt, it erased a way of life, leaving behind only these fragmented whispers of what was lost. Across the sea in Egypt, the tempest stele of Ahmose tells a parallel story. Carved during the New Kingdom's founding, it describes days of unnatural darkness, thunderous storms, and chaos. The gods upset the sky with tumult. For decades, scholars debated whether this described Thera's fallout, but recent geological studies found volcanic ash layers in Nile Delta sediment matching the eruption's timeline. The Hyksos may have fallen to Ahmose's armies, but nature dealt both victor and vanquished a shared blow, disrupting the climate for years. Crops failed, famine spread, and the sun, the very symbol of Egyptian divine order, hid behind eerie, ash-filtered light. This catastrophe inevitably birthed legends. Could Thera be the kernel of Plato's Atlantis tale? Written over a millennium later, his account of a sophisticated island nation vanishing beneath the waves aligns uncannily with Akrotiri's fate. The Minoans' advanced plumbing, vibrant art, and maritime prowess fit Plato's description of Atlantean society, while their sudden decline mirrors his moral parable of a civilization punished by the gods. But here's the twist. No Egyptian records mention Atlantis by name, and Thera's eruption predates Plato by centuries. The truth may lie in the fluid nature of oral tradition, disaster stories morphing over generations, blending Minoan collapse with dimly remembered floods until a philosopher wove them into a cautionary myth. What's undeniable is how Thera reshaped history. The Minoans, already weakened by earlier earthquakes, never fully recovered. Their trading networks collapsed, their influence waned, and within centuries, Mycenaean Greeks filled the power vacuum. Yet in that fragility lies an unexpected legacy. Thera's ash preserved not just ruins but moments, a child's footprint in wet plaster, a storage jar still filled with burnt lentils, a golden ibex figurine abandoned mid-flight. These weren't just victims of a natural disaster. They were people who painted dolphins leaping in cobalt seas, who built cities without fortifications because, for a time, the world felt safe enough to dance with bulls. Their end reminds us that even the brightest civilizations flicker in the face of the Earth's raw power, but the stories they leave behind, those can outlast mountains. High above the olive groves of the Argolid Plain, the towering walls of Mycenae still loom not just as ruins, but as stone witnesses to a warrior culture that would shape Greek identity for millennia. Built around 1,400 years before the Common Era, these citadels weren't merely fortresses. They were power centers of a society obsessed with strength, gold, and the fragile line between mortality and legend. Walk through the Lion Gate today. Its massive lintel stone weighing over 20 tons, carved with two rampant lions flanking a Minoan-style column, and you're stepping into a world that Homer would immortalize centuries later as the age of Agamemnon and Achilles. The sheer scale of Mycenaean's Cyclopean walls, so named because later Greeks believed only mythical giants could have lifted such boulders, speaks volumes. Stones the size of small elephants were fitted together without mortar, their irregular shapes interlocking with near-impossible precision. But the real shock lies inside the citadel. Heinrich Schliemann's excavations in the 1870s uncovered shaft graves brimming with treasures that still dazzle, death masks of hammered gold, one famously dubbed the Mask of Agamemnon, intricate daggers inlaid with scenes of lion hunts in yellow and gold, and hundreds of amber beads from the Baltic, proof of trade networks stretching halfway across Europe. Just 15 miles away, Tarim reveals another facet of Mycenaean ingenuity. Its walls, some 20 feet thick, concealed secret cisterns and subterranean passages, innovations designed to withstand sieges. A massive ramp led to the palace atop the Acropolis, wide enough for chariots to ascend. But the most telling discovery came not from grand architecture, but from humble clay, linear B tablets. These palm-sized records, baked hard by the fires that destroyed the palaces, were initially dismissed as mundane inventories of sheep, lists of chariot wheels, rations paid to textile workers. Then in 1952, Michael Ventris cracked their code, revealing an early form of Greek. Suddenly, these dry accounts pulsed with life, names like Hector and Achilles appearing centuries before Homer, a bureaucratic glimpse into the world that would inspire epic poetry. What emerges is a society far more complex than Homer's Bronze Age caricature. The Mycenaeans weren't just warlords, they were administrators, traders, and engineers. Their palaces had drainage systems rivaling Knossos. Their frescoes blended Minoan elegance with a grittier aesthetic, think charging bulls beside scenes of battle. Even their religion foreshadowed classical Greece. Tablets mention Zeus, Hera, and Poseidon, though these gods likely held different roles than in later myth. The connection to the Iliad is tantalizing but slippery. Troy Via, the layer most likely matching Homer's city, shows signs of violent destruction around 1,180 years before the Common Era, close to traditional dates for the Trojan War. Mycenaean pottery found at Troy confirms contact, if not necessarily conflict. Whether Agamemnon's coalition was historical or poetic license remains debated, but the material culture aligns strikingly. Boar's tusk helmets like those described by Homer appear in frescoes, while Nestor's famed cup of gold finds echoes in the delicate stemmed goblets unearthed at Pylos. Perhaps the true legacy of these citadels lies in their paradox. The Mycenaeans borrowed heavily from Minoan art and technology, yet infused it with a harsher, more martial spirit. They built not for beauty alone, but for intimidation. Those Cyclopean walls weren't just defensive, they proclaimed, "We are unassailable." And when their civilization collapsed around 1,100 years before the Common Era, victims of drought, invasion, or internal strife, they left behind not just ruins, but a cultural DNA that would resurface in the city-states of classical Greece. The blood-drinking warriors of Homer's epics may be exaggerated, but the gold, the glory, and the grim determination to carve their names into history, those were as real as the stones of Mycenae still standing, still daring us to measure our own ambitions against theirs. The scorching Syrian plains near the Orontes River bore witness to history's first great chariot clash in the year 1274 before the Common Era, when two superpowers, Egypt under Ramses the Great and the Hittite Empire led by Muwatalli Roman II, collided in a showdown that would redefine Bronze Age warfare. The Battle of Kadesh wasn't just a skirmish over a strategic fortress city. It was a high-stakes chess match played with horse-drawn chariots and blistering propaganda. Ramses, ever the master of self-promotion, left us an unprecedented gift: towering temple reliefs at Abu Simbel, Karnak, and Luxor that depict the battle in cinematic detail, complete with swooping arrows, rearing horses, and the pharaoh himself single-handedly decimating Hittite forces like a god of war. But peel back the bravado, and a far more fascinating story emerges, one of tactical blunders, near disaster, and the world's oldest surviving peace treaty. What makes Kadesh revolutionary is its chariot tactics. The Hittites fielded heavier, three-man vehicles, a driver, shield-bearer, and spearman, while the Egyptians relied on lighter, faster two-man chariots with composite bows. The difference was like comparing a battering ram to a scalpel. Muwatalli's forces ambushed Ramses' advancing division, using the terrain to conceal nearly 3,000 chariots until the last moment. Egyptian accounts admit chaos erupted. The infantry and chariotry melted before them like wax. But here's where Ramses' spin takes over. His reliefs show him abandoned by his troops, calling upon Ammon's divine favor before charging alone into the fray, an improbable scenario that likely obscures a more plausible reality. Freshly discovered Hittite tablets from Hattusa tell a different tale. Ramses' elite Nerin troops, possibly Canaanite allies, arrived as reinforcements, turning certain defeat into a grinding stalemate. The aftermath birthed something unexpected: the Kadesh Peace Treaty, etched onto a silver tablet now lost and copied in hieroglyphs and cuneiform. A replica sits in the United Nations headquarters today, hailed as the first recorded international accord. Its clauses read startlingly modern: mutual defense pacts, amnesty for defectors, even extradition protocols. If any enemy marches against the lands of Ramses, the Hittites shall send troops to destroy him, it declares. This wasn't just diplomacy, it was realpolitik. Both empires, exhausted by decades of war, recognized a greater threat: the rising power of Assyria to the east. Archaeology reveals deeper layers. At Kadesh itself, excavations show the city changed hands repeatedly, its walls scarred by sieges. Hittite chariot linchpins found near the battlefield confirm the descriptions of shattered wheels and panicked retreats. Most telling are the lieutenants' accounts buried in temple archives, like the scribe who recorded Ramses' furious rebuke of his officers. "Not one of you stood to help." The battle's true legacy lies in these contradictions: a pharaoh's boastful narrative masking a near catastrophe, a brutal fight yielding a groundbreaking peace, and chariots clashing not just for territory, but for the right to control history's first draft. 5 centuries before Herodotus, Kadesh gave us war as both reality and spectacle, a duality every general since has wrestled with. Beneath the crystal-clear waters off Turkey's southern coast lies a time capsule from the height of Bronze Age globalization. The Uluburun shipwreck, a merchant vessel that sank around 1,300 years before the Common Era, carrying the equivalent of a floating Walmart. Discovered by a sponge diver in 1982, this 44-foot wooden ship wasn't just another sunken relic. Its cargo revealed an interconnected Mediterranean world more complex than scholars ever imagined. Picture divers carefully retrieving 10 tons of copper ingots shaped like ox hides, stacks of tin bars from Central Asia, and Canaanite jars still stuffed with terebinth resin, ancient superglue for waterproofing ships. This wasn't just trade, it was a supply chain spanning 3 continents, frozen in a moment of disaster. Dendrochronology, the science of tree ring dating, helped pinpoint the ship's final voyage with eerie precision. By analyzing wood from the hull and comparing growth patterns to master chronologies, researchers determined the ship's planks were cut from trees felled around 1,305 years before the Common Era, likely setting sail shortly after. But the real surprise came when they matched the timber to forests in Lebanon, confirming cedar from the famed Phoenician coast. Every plank told a story: tight growth rings indicating drought years, axe marks still visible after 3 millennia, even traces of shipworms that had gnawed the hull before its final plunge. The treasure trove of goods reads like a Bronze Age commodities report. Alongside metals were elephant tusks from Africa, ebony logs from Nubia, and glass ingots in vivid cobalt and lavender, likely destined for Mycenaean workshops to be melted into palace fresco decorations. A single gold scarab inscribed with Queen Nefertiti's name suggests diplomatic gifts on board, while terracotta oil lamps and fishing weights hint at the crew's daily life. Most astonishing were the pan-balanced scales and stone weights in Babylonian, Egyptian, and Aegean standards. Proof this ship wasn't just moving goods, but navigating multiple economic systems simultaneously. What truly staggers isn't the diversity of items, but how they map forgotten routes. The tin alone rewrote history books. Trace element analysis linked it to mines in modern Uzbekistan, meaning this metal traveled over 2,000 miles by caravan to Mediterranean ports before even boarding the ship. Combined with Cypriot copper, it would have produced enough bronze to arm an entire army, a floating strategic reserve. The presence of Baltic amber and Italian swords further suggests the ship hugged coastlines in a grand loop from the Aegean to Sardinia and back, connecting dots between palace economies. The human stories linger longest. Nestled among the cargo lay personal items, a bronze dagger with a weathered handle, a stone cosmetic palette for grinding eye paint, even a single gold hoop earring lost in the chaos. These weren't faceless traders, they were sailors, artisans, and perhaps even diplomats whose lives ended abruptly when storm or piracy sent their vessel tumbling down a steep underwater cliff. Today, reconstructed replicas of the ship's cargo displayed in Bodrum's Museum of Underwater Archaeology let us touch the very objects that passed through hands in Ugarit, Troy, and Knossos, bridging the gap between ancient harbors and our modern curiosity. The Uluburun wreck proves the Bronze Age Mediterranean wasn't a patchwork of isolated kingdoms, but a humming network where a ship's hold could carry the seeds of empires. While Mesopotamia and Egypt were perfecting their bronze weaponry across the world in the Yellow River Valley, China's Shang dynasty was elevating metalwork to an art form of staggering spiritual significance. Around 1,600 years before the Common Era, Shang craftsmen weren't just making tools, they were casting vessels so intricate, so laden with symbolic power, that they became conduits between heaven and earth. The crown jewel of these creations, the Humuwu Ding, a three-legged cauldron so massive it weighs over 800 kilograms, the heaviest bronze object surviving from the ancient world. This wasn't cookware, it was a ritual altar in metal, its surface crawling with touty motifs, stylized animal masks that may have represented protective spirits or deified ancestors gazing eternally from the spirit realm. What sets Shang bronzes apart is their piece mold casting technique, a method so complex it baffled modern metallurgists for decades. Unlike the lost wax casting used in the West, where molten metal fills a single-use wax mold, Shang artisans assembled reusable clay molds around a clay core, leaving a precise gap for bronze to flow. The molds themselves were artworks carved with inverse designs, so every swirl and creature emerged in crisp relief. After casting, the molds could be disassembled and reused, allowing standardized production while maintaining handcrafted individuality. The result, vessels with razor-sharp details, from the spiral thunder patterns echoing early Chinese writing to the protruding animal heads that seemed to snarl from the metal. These creations served one sacred purpose: ancestor worship. Shang rulers believed their deceased forebears could intercede with Dai, the supreme deity, but only if nourished with ritual feasts. Inscriptions inside vessels like the Simuwu Fangding record sacrifices of wine, millet, and even human captives to Father Ding, 10 Qiang prisoners, 10 oxen. The dings weren't mere containers, their very shapes held cosmic meaning. The round ones symbolized heaven, square ones represented earth, and their legs lifted offerings into the realm of spirits. Modern CT scans reveal some vessels were used repeatedly, their interiors scorched by fire and stained by millennia-old residue. Comparing Shang metallurgy to Mesopotamia reveals fascinating contrast. While Western smiths prized bronze for its utility in weapons and tools, Shang elites saw metal primarily as a medium for sacred communication. The Near East had ziggurats reaching skyward. China built its pyramids inward, layers of meaning folded into bronze. Even the alloy ratios differed. Shang bronzes contain higher tin percentages, giving them a golden hue and resonant ring when struck, likely intentional for ceremonial music. And where Mesopotamian signed works with cylinder seals, Shang artists left no names, subsuming individual genius into collective tradition. The scale of production hints at a state-controlled industry. Nearby Enyang workshops yielded thousands of broken molds, suggesting assembly line precision. Ore came from mines hundreds of miles away, tin from the Yangtze, copper from the Zhengxiao Mountains, all transported by a bureaucracy capable of mobilizing thousands. Some vessels bear clan insignia, perhaps marking workshop lineages, and the Humuwu Ding's inscription Mother Wu ties it to a real woman, Lady Fu Hao, whose tomb later yielded 200 bronzes confirming her status as both queen and military leader. Perhaps most striking is how these objects fuse art, technology, and belief. The Taoti's symmetrical face, split down the middle and mirrored perfectly on either side, may represent shamanic visions of spirit animals. The zoomorphic handles aren't just decoration, they're the creatures carrying messages to the gods. Even the sulfur traces in the bronze might be intentional. Some scholars suggest they created iridescent surfaces mimicking celestial phenomena. For the Shang, beauty wasn't divorced from function. A well-cast vessel didn't just please the eye, it ensured cosmic order. When we hold a Shang wine pourer today, its body heavy with history, its surface alive with dragons, we're not just touching metal. We're touching the worldview of a civilization that saw no divide between the material and the mystical, where every bronze curve was a prayer cast in alloy, waiting 3,000 years to be heard. Deep in the rugged highlands of Anatolia, the Hittite Empire guarded a secret that would rewrite the rules of power: iron. Not the brittle, rust-prone metal known to earlier cultures, but a revolutionary new form hardened through a process called tempering. Around 1,200 years before the Common Era, while empires from Egypt to Mesopotamia relied on bronze, a metal requiring scarce tin, Hittite smiths were heating iron blooms in charcoal furnaces, then quenching them in water or oil to produce weapons that bent rather than shattered. This wasn't just innovation, it was industrial espionage on a civilization-shaking scale. The Hittites went so far as to inscribe curses on their iron treaties, warning against sharing the technology. Let the gods of the oaths destroy anyone who reveals these techniques to foreigners. At first glance, iron seemed an unlikely game changer. Early versions were often softer than bronze. Archaeologists find Hittite daggers with edges rolled from hard use. But iron had two world-altering advantages. First, its ores were everywhere, from riverbeds to mountain slopes, freeing kingdoms from the tyranny of tin trade routes that stretched from Afghanistan to Cornwall. Second, when properly tempered, heated, and cooled in precise sequences, iron developed a steely resilience that bronze couldn't match. A bronze sword might last 20 battles before deforming. A tempered iron blade could endure 50. The difference wasn't just durability, it was psychological. Imagine an Egyptian spearman watching his bronze-tipped weapon glance off a Hittite warrior's tempered iron scale armor. The shock of realizing your enemy's tools outclassed yours. The geopolitical earthquake came not from iron's superiority, but from its accessibility. Bronze required maintaining vast, vulnerable supply chains. One reason Troy fought so fiercely to control the Dardanelles, a choke point for Black Sea tin shipments. Iron, by contrast, could be sourced locally anywhere. When the Hittite Empire collapsed around 1,200 years before the Common Era, likely from a perfect storm of drought, invasion, and internal revolt, their iron-smithing secrets spilled across the Mediterranean. At Philistine Ashkelon, archaeologists uncovered the first post-Hittite iron knives, their metallurgy still crude but improving fast. From there, the genie couldn't be rebottled. The ripple effects were catastrophic for bronze elites. Mycenaean Greek palaces, their economies built on bronze monopolies, crumbled as cheaper iron flooded markets. In Egypt, Ramses Roman III records mourn the foreigners who knew not how to work bronze, a dismissive jab at iron-armed sea peoples ravaging the delta. Even Mesopotamia's mighty Assyrians, initially bronze-dependent, pivoted hard to iron by the 9th century before the Common Era, their armies soon carving an empire with iron-tipped arrows that could pierce bronze helmets like parchment. What began as a Hittite trade secret became the great equalizer. Iron didn't just change weapons, it democratized power. Village blacksmiths from Iberia to India could now produce serviceable tools and arms without relying on far-flung tin mines or royal monopolies. The Bronze Age's glittering palace economies, built on controlling scarce metals, found themselves outflanked by a technology that turned common rocks into revolution. Long after Hittite kings vanished into dust, their greatest legacy endured not in inscribed monuments or battle hymns, but in the very soil underfoot, where the iron they first mastered still rusts, quietly whispering of the day the world switched from bronze to steel's ancestor. The Mediterranean world was unraveling, around 1,177 years before the Common Era, as drought and earthquake shook the late Bronze Age's foundations. A new terror erupted from the sea, wave after wave of invaders known only as the Sea Peoples. The ruins of Ugarit, a thriving Syrian port city, preserve their arrival in haunting detail. A kiln-fired tablet left unsent in the city's final hours pleads for help. The enemy's ships are here. Our crops are burned, our people starving. Can't you see we are perishing? Within days, Ugarit was reduced to smoldering rubble, its libraries of cuneiform tablets buried under collapsed walls, its docks littered with shattered trade goods from Cyprus and Egypt. At Medinet Habu, Ramses Roman III mortuary temple near Thebes, the pharaoh immortalized his victory over these enigmatic raiders in sprawling reliefs that resemble a Bronze Age action movie. The scenes ripple with chaotic energy, long-bearded warriors in horned helmets tumbling from capsized ships, ox-drawn carts carrying women and children into battle, Egyptian archers picking off invaders with lethal precision. But who were these attackers? The inscriptions name them Peliset, Shekelesh, Denyon, yet their origins remain one of history's great detective stories. Theories abound. Some scholars trace their roots to Sardinia, pointing to neuralgic bronze figurines wearing horned helmets identical to those at Medinet Habu. Others propose displaced Mycenaean Greeks, noting that Denyon might echo Homer's Danons. Then there's the Balkan connection. Pottery shards found in destroyed coastal cities match styles from the Adriatic. What's clear is that this wasn't a single army, but a patchwork alliance of desperate migrants, displaced warriors, and opportunistic pirates, united by hunger and the collapse of old borders. Ramses' triumph came at a cost. His reliefs boast of stacking severed hands to count the dead, but hidden in the small print are clues to Egypt's Pyrrhic victory. One scene shows captive sea peoples being branded with the pharaoh's name, not as slaves, but as mercenaries enlisted to guard the Nile Delta. Even the Peliset, likely ancestors of the Philistines, eventually settled on Canaan's coast, their distinctive pottery blending Egyptian and Aegean styles. The invaders who nearly toppled empires became, in time, their neighbors. Modern archaeology reveals a grimmer reality beneath the propaganda. At sites like Kadesh and Megiddo, destruction layers tell of cities burned so thoroughly that glass vessels melted in the heat. Yet in some places, like the Lebanese port of Byblos, life continued uninterrupted, proof the sea peoples targeted specific foes, not mindlessly ravaged coastlines. Their true legacy may be as both destroyers and unwitting catalysts. The old system of Bronze Age palace economies, dependent on rigid hierarchies and fragile trade routes, collapsed under their assaults. From the ashes rose a world where iron, not bronze, would shape humanity's next chapter, a transition as violent as it was transformative. the Sea Peoples left no chronicles, no grand monuments. Only the echoes of terror in clay tablets and the defiant carvings of those who survived them. Perhaps that's fitting. They were less a people than a force of nature, a storm that swept away an era, leaving behind not answers, but the fertile silence from which new civilizations would grow. Between roughly 1,200 and 1,150 years before the Common Era, the glittering world of the Bronze Age unraveled with terrifying speed. From the sun-baked citadels of Mycenaean to the labyrinthine archives of Hattusa, palace after palace fell silent, their fires left to smolder untended. Modern archaeologists sifting through these ruins confront a mystery wrapped in ash. How could so many thriving civilizations collapse almost simultaneously? The answer, like the age itself, is forged from many metals. Climate science offers one key piece of the puzzle. Ice cores from Greenland and sediment samples from the Nile tell a story of punishing drought, a period scholars call Drought Roman III. Tree rings from Anatolian oaks show stunted growth for decades, while Egyptian records speak of the Nile failing to rise for 7 straight years. At Ugarit, a desperate letter begs for grain shipments. There is famine in our house. We will die of hunger. The very trade networks that once enriched these kingdoms now became their Achilles' heel. When harvests failed everywhere, no one had surplus to share. Yet nature alone didn't doom the Bronze Age. The intricate systems holding these societies together, the palace bureaucracies, the specialized craftsmen, the fragile tin routes stretching across continents created a house of cards. When Hittite envoys complained of delayed copper shipments from Cyprus, or when Mycenaean scribes recorded dwindling wool quotas, they were witnessing what historian Robert Drews called systems collapse. Like overstretched empires throughout history, they became victims of their own complexity. At Pylos, linear bead tablets from the final days reveal frantic efforts to muster rowers for coastal defense, while inventories show bronze being recycled from sacred objects into weapons, the equivalent of melting church bells for bullets. Then came the human spark that ignited this tinderbox, the so-called Sea Peoples, though that label may be too simplistic. At Hattusa, the Hittite capital, the end came with horrifying thoroughness. Charred timber beams and smashed statues of gods suggest the city wasn't just abandoned, but ritually desecrated. Yet intriguingly, nearby villages show no signs of violence. Whatever happened here targeted the political elite specifically. Similarly, Troy VI's destruction layer reveals earthquake damage preceding human assault, hinting that these invasions may have been opportunistic strikes against already weakened foes. The truth likely lies in the collision of all three factors. Climate stress bred desperation, desperation bred migration, and migration overwhelmed systems too rigid to adapt. In the eerie silence left behind the abandoned workshops of Nkomi, the overgrown roads leading to Mycenaean, we see not just an end but a transformation. The survivors would eventually rebuild, but their world would never again revolve around bronze. The fires that consumed the palaces also cleared the ground for something new, an age of iron, of smaller communities, and ultimately the seeds of classical civilization. The greatest lesson of the collapse may be this: no society, no matter how grandiose its monuments, is immune to the tides of change. Imagine trying to write a shopping list with hundreds of wedge-shaped symbols, each representing syllables or whole words. That was daily life for scribes using Mesopotamian cuneiform. By 1,050 years before the Common Era, along the cedar-lined coasts of modern Lebanon, the Phoenicians had perfected a radical alternative: 22 simple marks that could record any word in their language. This wasn't just an evolution in writing, it was a revolution in human communication, one that would leap across continents on the backs of snails. The genius of the Phoenician alphabet lay in its brutal efficiency. Where cuneiform required memorizing 600 signs and Egyptian hieroglyphs mixed phonetic and pictorial elements, these new characters represented pure sounds, consonants stripped to their essence. Picture a merchant in Tyre scratching BT house into clay with 2 quick strokes instead of laboring over intricate symbols. Suddenly, writing wasn't confined to temple-trained elites. Traders could jot cargo manifests, sailors could mark navigation logs, even farmers might scrawl their names. The cost of literacy plummeted from years of schooling to weeks of practice. But how did these squiggles, ancestors of our ABCs, spread across the ancient world? Follow the trail of a color worth more than gold, Tyrian purple. Harvested from murex sea snails in vast coastal vats, this dye stained royal robes from Babylon to Rome. Phoenician merchant ships became floating classrooms, their captains using alphabetic notes to track dye batches, their crews teaching the system in ports from Carthage to Kadesh. On Cyprus, archaeologists found an inscribed copper spatula from the 9th century before the Common Era, a Phoenician metalworker's signature. In Sardinia, a sherd bears a practice alphabet scrawled by an Etruscan apprentice. Each trade route became an information highway. The Greeks made the leap to vowels by adapting Phoenician letters around 800 years before the Common Era, alpha from Aleph ox, beta from Beth house. But the Phoenicians' real legacy wasn't just the shapes. It was the idea that knowledge needn't be locked behind priestly gates. When a Roman senator wrote a law, when a Hebrew scribe penned psalm, even when an Arabian poet composed verses, they were unwitting heirs to those Levantine traders who turned snail trails into an alphabet that would outlast empires. When King Wu of Zhou raised his army against the Shang dynasty in 1046 years before the Common Era, he didn't just stage a rebellion, he invoked a cosmic real estate contract between rulers and the universe itself. The mandate of heaven wasn't merely politics dressed in spiritual language. It was a revolutionary idea that would shape Chinese governance for millennia. The divine right to rule wasn't inherited but earned through moral conduct. The Shang kings had long claimed their authority came from their ancestors' direct line to Dai, the supreme deity. But Wu's victory at the Battle of Mui, where Shang forces allegedly turned their own chariots against their corrupt ruler, became the living proof of a radical new doctrine. When rulers falter, heaven withdraws its favor. The Daoyuding, a massive bronze cauldron cast under Wu's successors, immortalizes this ideology in shimmering metal. Unlike earlier Shang vessels that glorified conquest and sacrifice, its inscription reads like a bureaucratic audit of virtuous governance. We cherish the mandate, not daring to indulge in idle rest. The characters themselves, cast with deliberate clarity, emphasize accountability. Here was a ruler literally etching his obligations into ceremonial bronze, transforming what was once a sacred cooking vessel into a public ledger of moral stewardship. The Ding's touty motifs, those haunting animal masks, no longer just warded off spirits. They became silent witnesses to the Zhu's contractual relationship with the cosmos. What made this concept revolutionary was its built-in expiration clause. Unlike the eternal divine right claimed by Egyptian pharaohs or Mesopotamian kings, the mandate of heaven could be revoked through natural disasters, peasant revolts, or military defeats, all interpreted as cosmic feedback. A drought wasn't just bad weather, it was heaven's Yelp review of the emperor's performance. When the Zhou later faced their own decline, the very doctrine they created would justify their overthrow, completing the circle. Archaeology reveals how meticulously the Zhou marketed this idea. Excavated turtle shells used for divination show a sudden shift from asking ancestral spirits for guidance to interrogating heaven itself about governance. Ritual bronzes commissioned by early Zhou rulers deliberately mimicked Shang styles not out of nostalgia, but to visually legitimize their succession while rebranding the old symbols with new meanings. The Daoyuding's inscription even includes a Zhou version of Shang founding myths, retroactively inserting their ancestors into the historical narrative like celestial ghostwriters. Yet for all its lofty philosophy, the mandate had ruthlessly practical roots. The Zhou, originally frontier vassals of the Shang, needed to justify their coup to other reluctant states. By framing tyranny as a violation of cosmic order rather than personal ambition, they turned rebellion into a public service. Later dynasties would weaponize this idea, from Han emperors citing floods as evidence of their predecessors' failures, to Ming rebels interpreting earthquakes as heaven's endorsement of regime change. Even 20th century revolutionaries would echo its language, proving that the most durable bronze isn't cast in foundries, but in the human hunger for legitimacy. The Daoyuding now sits in Beijing's National Museum, its once radical message worn smooth by 3,000 years of history, yet still whispering a warning to rulers everywhere. Power is never truly permanent, only the terms of its lease. Across the windswept cliffs of Tarim, Sweden, Bronze Age artists carved stories into stone that still shimmer with mystery today. These petroglyphs, etched around 1,700 years before the Common Era, transform entire rock faces into sprawling canvases, ships with towering prows, warriors brandishing axes, and most haunting of all, massive sun wheels radiating like celestial fingerprints. At the Vitlik panel, one particular scene pulses with life. A line of 7 figures raising what might be sun discs or bronze lures toward a vessel that seems to hover between sea and sky. This wasn't random doodling, it was a sacred language in stone, one that tied Scandinavia's far northern shores to the glittering world of Mediterranean bronze. The ships dominate these carvings, not the modest dugouts of earlier eras, but sophisticated vessels with high stems, intricate rigging, and crews marked by vertical strokes like tally marks. Some stretch over 13 feet long on the rock, their prows curling like bull's horns. What's startling is how closely they resemble ships painted on frescoes in Mycenaean palaces thousands of miles south. That's no coincidence. Baltic amber, the gold of the north, flowed along these sea routes traded for Mycenaean bronze and Cretan pottery. Chemical analysis proves it. Amber beads found in Greek shaft graves match deposits from Danish coasts. The petroglyphs might be prayers for safe passage, or perhaps boasts of far-flung voyages, the Viking saga's Bronze Age prelude. Then there's the sun worship. At Tarim, solar discs appear alongside ships like divine escorts, while the famous Trundholm sun chariot, a bronze horse pulling a gilded sun disk, found in a Danish peat bog, reveals how deeply this cult ran. The disc's spiral motifs mirror those on Mycenaean swords and Minoan seals, suggesting shared cosmic symbolism. But here's the twist. While Mediterranean sun gods rode chariots across the sky, Scandinavian versions often traveled by ship, reflecting a maritime worldview. One Tarim carving even shows a sun disk cradled in a boat's prow like sacred cargo. The deeper you look, the more layers emerge. Those warriors might actually be dancers, their curved bodies echoing ritual movements still practiced in folk traditions today. The axe-wielding figures could represent gods like Thor's precursor, their weapons doubling as thunder symbols, and the cup marks dotting the rocks, some align with solstice sunrises, turning these cliffs into astronomical calendars. What emerges is a portrait of a connected but distinct Scandinavia, drawing inspiration from southern bronze cultures while forging its own identity. The Trundholm chariot's tin likely came from Cornwall, its artistry inspired by Hungarian motifs, yet its purpose was purely local, to ceremonially pull the sun through winter's darkness. These carvers didn't just record their world, they negotiated it, chiseling bridges between the tangible and the divine, between Baltic shores and a Mediterranean now faintly glowing in memory's dusk. Every stroke of their stone tools whispers the same truth even on civilization's edges. Bronze and belief knew no borders. Rising from Malta's golden limestone plateau nearly 5,000 years ago, the temples of Haga Kim stand as a riddle wrapped in stone. Built around 2,500 years before the Common Era, centuries before the Great Pyramid's first block was cut, these sprawling complexes weren't just sacred spaces. They were celestial calculators engineered with uncanny precision. The South Temple's main doorway frames the summer solstice sunrise so perfectly that on June 21st, dawn's first light slices through the corridor like a laser, illuminating a carved niche that may have held ritual objects. Nearby, an elliptical chamber aligns with the winter solstice sunset, its stone slabs perforated with small holes that cast dagger-like shadows tracking the sun's descent. This wasn't just architecture, it was astronomy set in rock. What's truly baffling isn't just their sophistication, but their timing. While most of Europe still clung to simple dolmens and wooden circles, Malta's temple builders were erecting multi-chambered sanctuaries with concave facades, corbelled roofs, and intricate spiral carvings rivaling Newgrange's artistry. The so-called Fat Lady statues found here, voluptuous limestone figures with pleated skirts and exaggerated hips, hint at a mother goddess cult far more developed than contemporary fertility figurines elsewhere. Yet just as the Bronze Age was reaching its zenith across the Mediterranean, Malta's temples fell silent. By 2,400 years before the Common Era, Haga Kim lay abandoned, its altars gathering dust while Mycenaean kings and Hittite smiths reshaped the world. Theories about their collapse read like a detective novel. Soil analysis reveals catastrophic erosion, perhaps from deforestation to fuel temple construction's insatiable demand for fire-hardened limestone. Animal bones show sudden dietary shifts from cattle to smaller game, suggesting ecological strain. Then there's the water problem. Malta lacks natural springs, and temple builders may have overextended their cistern systems during prolonged droughts. But the most haunting clue comes from the temples themselves. At nearby Tarxian, archaeologists found evidence of deliberate fire setting stones cracked by intense heat, as if the temples were ritually closed rather than conquered. These silent stones whisper a warning echoed across history. Brilliance is no shield against fragility. While civilizations like Egypt and Mesopotamia thrived by adapting, absorbing invaders, innovating technologies, Malta's insular culture doubled down on tradition until it became a beautiful dead end. The Fat Lady statues weren't just deities, they were mirrors of a society that, for all its astronomical genius, couldn't chart a course beyond its own horizons. As dawn's light still pierces Haga Kim's solstice corridor, it illuminates not just ancient ingenuity, but the peril of mistaking permanence for immortality. Around 1,500 years before the Common Era, the wind-swept steppes of Central Asia birthed a migration that would reshape an entire subcontinent, the movement of the Vedic Aryans into the Indus Valley. The Rig Veda, a collection of Sanskrit hymns composed during this era, pulses with the rhythm of hoofbeats and chariot wheels, offering tantalizing clues about these nomadic pastoralists who worshipped sky gods like Indra, the thunder-wielding breaker of forts. One hymn celebrates him as the one who rends forts as age consumes a garment, a poetic image that takes on startling archaeological significance when paired with the charred ruins of Harappan cities like Mohenjo-Daro, where layers of ash and unburied skeletons suggest violent upheaval. The Aryans' edge lay in their revolutionary chariot technology, lightweight wooden vehicles with spoked wheels pulled by swift horses unknown to the Indus Valley civilization. Reconstructions based on Rigvedic descriptions reveal two-wheeled marvels that could pivot rapidly in battle, their rawhide wheels wrapped with metal linings for durability. When paired with composite bows, these chariots became Bronze Age tanks, enabling hit-and-run tactics against slower infantry. At the Harappan site of Dolavera, archaeologists found horse bones suddenly appearing in later strata alongside chariot imagery, a smoking gun for cultural disruption. Yet the story isn't as simple as invaders overwhelming natives. The Aryan migration theory, AMT, supported by linguistic and genetic evidence, suggests gradual infiltration rather than conquest. Sanskrit vocabulary, absorbing Dravidian words for local plants like rice, while the Harappans adopted Aryan deities like Shiva, who may have roots in the Indus Valley's own horned god figurines. Contrast this with the older Aryan invasion theory 8, which envisioned sweeping violence akin to later Mongol invasions. Modern archaeology complicates both views. Harappan cities were already declining due to climate shifts before the Aryans arrived, their rivers drying up as monsoons weakened. What emerges is a mosaic of cultural exchange. The Rigveda's famous Bharata tribe gives India its ancient name, yet genetic studies show modern South Asians descend from both groups. Fire altars described in Vedic texts appear at late Harappan sites like Kalibangan, suggesting ritual blending. Even the caste system's roots may lie in this collision, the Rigveda's Varna hierarchy initially distinguishing Aryans from others, later fossilizing into hereditary roles. The real legacy of this migration echoes in India's living traditions. Vedic chants still recited in original Sanskrit, yoga poses mirroring seals from Mohenjo-Daro, and the enduring question of whether civilizations end or transform when new voices join their story. As the morning sun still glints off the Gaga-Hakra riverbed, once the mighty Saraswati praised in the Rigveda, it illuminates not a clear-cut conquest, but the slow, luminous dance of cultures adapting to each other's rhythm. On the rugged island of Sardinia, where the mistral winds whip across rocky highlands, Bronze Age builders erected stone sentinels that still dominate the landscape 3,800 years later. The Nuraghi massive conical towers built without mortar aren't just ancient ruins, they're masterclasses in defensive engineering. Picture circular fortresses rising up to 90 feet, their walls constructed from basalt blocks carefully tapered inward like a giant's upturned funnel, each layer slightly offset to distribute weight and withstand earthquakes. Inside, spiral staircases corkscrew upward between concentric chambers, while narrow slits serve as both ventilation and arrow loops, a deadly innovation predating medieval castles by millennia. But the true stroke of genius lies in their placement. Perched atop strategic hills, Nuraghi form interlocking sightlines across the island, allowing smoke or reflected sunlight to relay warnings from coast to interior in minutes. This wasn't just architecture, it was a Bronze Age early warning system carved in stone. The mystery deepens when you consider who built them. Sardinian metalworkers were renowned across the Mediterranean for their bronze figurines of archers and warriors, statuettes bearing horned helmets eerily similar to those worn by the Shurden, one of the sea peoples who ravaged Egypt. Could these tower builders have been the same marauders? At the Nurag Arubiu, archaeologists found Mycenaean pottery shards alongside local ware, hinting at contact with the Aegean world. Even more telling are the giants' tombs, Sardinia's communal burials marked by carved stone stelae showing warriors wielding distinctive curved swords, blades matching those in Ramses Roman III depictions of Shurden fighters. The island's rich copper and silver mines would have made it a prized target for piracy or trade, leaving its people no choice but to build fortresses or become prey. Just 50 miles from the Nuraghi clusters stands Monte Ducote, a monument so out of place it seems teleported from Mesopotamia. This trapezoidal platform, built around 2,700 years before the Common Era, rises like a ziggurat amidst the Mediterranean scrub, its ramps and terraces mirroring the temples of Ur and Uruk. Unlike the Nuraghi's martial purpose, Akkadi was likely a sacred space, its altar stones still bearing traces of animal sacrifices. The parallels are uncanny. Both structures used rammed earth cores faced with stone, both aligned with celestial events. Akkadi's staircase points to the summer solstice sunrise, and both suggest Sardinia was no isolated backwater, but a crossroads where Mesopotamian ideas might have sailed alongside tin and amber. What emerges is an island of contradictions: fortress builders who traded with distant empires, farmers who crafted exquisite bronze art, and perhaps warriors whose descendants would become both the terror and mercenaries of pharaohs. The Nuraghi didn't just defend Sardinia, they encoded its people's ingenuity into the very bedrock, leaving behind stone puzzles that still dare us to unravel their secrets. Buried beneath the lowest plains of China's Yellow River Valley, the ruins of Uluburun whisper a tantalizing riddle. Are these the remnants of the legendary Xia dynasty, or simply the earliest stirrings of the Shang? For centuries, Chinese historians treated the Xia as fact, their kings chronicled in texts like the Bamboo Annals, with reigns stretching back to around 2070 before the Common Era. But when archaeologists began unearthing Uluburun in the 1950s, they found no inscribed bronzes proclaiming Xia, no royal tombs with identifying seals, just towering rammed earth palace foundations, exquisite jade scepters, and bronze workshops hinting at sudden technological leaps. The debate that erupted wasn't just academic, it struck at the heart of how civilizations claim their origins. Walk through Uluburun's Phase Roman II palace complex today, and you're treading on what may be China's first capital. The central platform, measuring 300 feet long, still bears the parallel grooves of wooden tamping tools used to compact each layer of soil, a construction technique so labor-intensive it screams centralized power. Nearby, an elite burial yielded a dragon-shaped scepter of turquoise inlaid with over 2,000 pieces, its sinuous form echoing later Chinese dragon motifs. But here's the rub. While traditional histories place the Xia here, radiocarbon dating pins Uluburun's zenith to 1,750 years before the Common Era, centuries later than the Xia are said to have ruled. Could this be the Shang's birthplace instead? The jades complicate the picture. Uluburun's workshops produced ritual blades and axes of nephrite so thin they're translucent, a technology surpassing earlier Neolithic cultures. One ceremonial yajang blade, its edges sharp as a whispered secret, mirrors descriptions of royal insignia in Zhou-era texts about the Xia. Yet identical blades appear at early Shang sites like Yanqi, suggesting either cultural continuity or outright appropriation. Meanwhile, the bronze casting crucibles found here reveal something revolutionary, the earliest known use of piece mold techniques that would define Chinese metallurgy for millennia. Was this innovation Xia ingenuity or Shang brilliance? Skeptics like archaeologist Lothar von Falkenhausen point to the silence of the oracle bones, the Shang's famous divination records, which never mention a predecessor dynasty. Others counter that the Shang may have deliberately erased the Xia from history, much as conquerors often do. The doubting antiquity school of Chinese scholars goes further, arguing the Xia were purely mythical, retroactively invented to legitimize later rulers. But recent discoveries add fresh wrinkles. At the nearby Wangjinglu site, pottery shards bear markings strikingly similar to early Shang script. Could these be proto-writing from a transitional Xia-Shang period? What makes this more than dusty academic sparring is how it mirrors China's modern identity. For those who see Chinese civilization as an unbroken continuum, finding the Xia validates 5,000 years of history. For others, insisting on concrete proof before connecting dots reflects rigorous scholarship. Perhaps the truth lies in between. The Uluburun elites, whether they called themselves Xia or something else, clearly laid foundations both literal and cultural for what would become China. Their dragon scepters and bronze vessels weren't just objects, they were the first brushstrokes on a canvas that would eventually depict the Middle Kingdom. As the debate continues, one thing is certain. In the silent soil of Uluburun, history and myth are still wrestling for the right to name what was found. Beneath the rolling chalk downs of southern England, the grave of an ancient chieftain revealed a secret written not in words but in gold. The bush barrow lozenges, buried around 1,900 years before the Common Era with the so-called King of Stonehenge, glitter with a sophistication that still stuns archaeologists. These diamond-shaped sheets of wafer-thin gold, etched with precise geometric patterns, aren't just status symbols, they're Bronze Age cryptography. Under microscope analysis, the spacing of their concentric circles and perforations aligns uncannily with lunar cycles and solar alignments, suggesting these weren't mere decorations, but portable astronomical calculators for a priesthood that could predict eclipses and solstices as easily as we check the time. The man buried with these lozenges at Bush Barrow near Stonehenge was no ordinary leader. His grave goods read like a manifesto of elite power, a bronze dagger with thousands of microscopic gold pins forming zigzag patterns on its hilt, a mace head of polished stone heavy enough to crush skulls, and 3 lozenges that would have adorned his cloak like celestial medals. But it's the largest lozenge that holds the deepest mystery. Its design divides into 24 concentric circles, a number matching the 18.6-year lunar nodal cycle crucial for predicting eclipses. When superimposed over Stonehenge's blueprint, the lozenge's angles mirror the monument station stone rectangle, proof that the same cosmic knowledge was being shared between metal and megalith. This was the Wessex culture at its zenith, a network of warrior traders whose wealth came from controlling the flow of continental bronze and Irish gold into Britain. Their chieftains wore amber from the Baltic, faience beads from Egypt, and jet from Yorkshire, a glittering resume of long-distance connections. At nearby Upton Lovell, another Wessex elite was buried with gold earrings so thin they could only have been made by artisans trained in Mycenaean Greece's finest workshops. The message was clear: these weren't local strongmen, but players in a pan-European game of power and prestige. Stonehenge itself was undergoing its final transformation during this era. The iconic Sarsen stones erected around this time formed a perfect solar calendar, their lintels locked together with stone dovetail joints normally reserved for woodworking. The Wessex elite likely presided over ceremonies here, their gold-adorned figures silhouetted against the sunrise as they displayed knowledge that could control the heavens. Recent isotope analysis of animal bones from nearby Durrington walls reveals cattle were driven hundreds of miles to be slaughtered at winter solstice feasts, some from as far as Scotland, proving Stonehenge drew pilgrims like a Bronze Age Mecca. What makes the Bush Barrow lozenges revolutionary is what they represent about knowledge consolidation. Earlier Neolithic societies built monuments aligned to the skies, but the Wessex culture miniaturized that cosmic authority into wearable gold. Owning these lozenges meant controlling not just material wealth, but the spiritual technology behind it, the ability to announce when to plant, when to raid, and when the gods would darken the sun. It's no coincidence that as bronze weapons proliferated, so did these symbols of celestial authority. Power was shifting from communal stone circles to individual elites who could hold the universe's secrets in their palms. The final twist lies in the lozenge's craftsmanship. The gold's chemical signature traces to Irish rivers, but the repoussé technique hammering patterns from behind mirrors styles from Brittany. This wasn't just local bling, it was the product of a transmarine aristocracy exchanging ideas along with goods. When the Bush Barrow chieftain took his secrets to the grave, he wasn't just being buried, he was being encrypted. And though his name is lost to time, his golden code still whispers across millennia, daring us to decipher how Bronze Age rulers turned starlight into sovereignty. Buried deep in the peat bogs of northern Europe, the Toland man lies in a haunting slumber, his face so perfectly preserved that when he was pulled from the Danish mire in 1950, discoverers thought they'd found a recent murder victim. Yet this man last drew breath around 3,200 years ago in the twilight of the Bronze Age. His leather cap still clings to his skull, the stubble on his chin is still visible, and the noose that took his life remains coiled around his neck like a twisted necklace. But was this a cold-blooded execution or something far more unsettling, an offering to gods we can barely comprehend? The answer may lie in his final meal. Analysis of Toland man's stomach contents revealed a gruel made of barley, flaxseed, and wild grasses, a humble dish laced with traces of a potent weed called pale persicaria. This wasn't just rough peasant fare. The combination matches descriptions of ritual meals from later Norse sagas, where sacrificial victims were fed special foods before meeting the gods. Even the way he was killed speaks to ceremony. The noose was tied with such care that it left no struggle marks, his body arranged almost respectfully in the bog. Nearby, other bog bodies like Grobbelman show similar patterns, slit throats with surgical precision, their hair ritually braided, their last meals shared in communal feasting. But not all bog bodies whisper of devotion. Some tell darker tales, like the Id girl from the Netherlands, her lopsided spine suggesting she was chosen for sacrifice because of physical differences. Or the brutalized remains of the Weirdange men, discovered locked in an eternal embrace, their wounds suggesting punishment rather than prayer. The bogs, it seems, were both temples and prisons. Their acidic, oxygen-poor waters preventing decay while tannins tanned skin into leather, creating accidental time capsules for violence and faith alike. What did these sacrifices buy? To Bronze Age farmers, the bogs were liminal spaces, neither land nor water, fertile yet deadly. Offering a life may have been seen as repayment for good harvests or protection from famine. The Toland man's placid expression, almost serene in death, hints at acceptance, or perhaps the effects of those mind-altering seeds in his last meal. Meanwhile, the presence of high-status objects like bronze axes in nearby votive deposits suggests the elite controlled these rituals, turning terror into theater to cement their power. Modern science peels back more layers. Isotope analysis reveals that Toland man wasn't local. His strontium levels suggest he traveled from afar, possibly as a captive or pilgrim. His manicured hands show no signs of hard labor, puzzling researchers. Was he a noble hostage, a druid, or simply someone unlucky enough to be chosen? The bogs keep their secrets close. Even as we map their genomes and analyze their last bites, these faces from the past resist simple answers, their preserved features forever frozen between our world and whatever lies beyond. Imagine walking into a Mesopotamian temple in the year 2000 before the Common Era, not to pray, but to withdraw a loan, with interest calculated in silver shekels measured by barley grain weights. This was the dawn of finance, where Sumerian temples doubled as the world's first banks, their clay tablets recording transactions with a precision that would make modern accountants nod in respect. The system revolved around the shekel, a unit not of coinage. Coins wouldn't appear for another 1,500 years, but of weight. 1 shekel equaled 180 grains of barley, a universal standard across city-states like and Lagash. Merchants carried balance scales in their belt pouches, weighing out silver rings or hacked-off chunks of ingots to pay for everything from imported timber to a bride's dowry. The real innovation lay in credit. Temple archives from overflow with loan tablets, some promising silver repayments, others denominated in barley, reflecting agriculture's central role. One particularly revealing contract from Lhasa details a loan of 5 shekels to a merchant named Lugal Ushumgal, with interest accruing at 20% annually. If he defaulted, his indentured servants became collateral. These weren't isolated deals, they formed networks. Temple records show merchants like Erdumuzida amassing portfolios spanning dozens of loans, his tablets meticulously tracking compounding interest across years. The parallels to modern banking are startling. Fractional reserve systems emerged when temples realized they could lend out more silver than physically held, trusting that not all debtors would demand repayment at once. But this system had teeth. The Code of Hammurabi carved repayment terms into stone, failed to settle a grain loan before harvest, and creditors could seize your field. Yet it wasn't all ruthless. During droughts, temples often issued debt moratoriums, early examples of economic stimulus. At Nippur, tablets reveal priests canceling loans for entire villages, invoking a justice of the king to prevent societal collapse. What truly astonishes is how these Bronze Age financiers tackled problems we still grapple with: inflation, When barley prices spiked due to poor harvests, temples fixed exchange rates to stabilize markets. Contract disputes, courts relied on signed clay tablets as legally binding evidence, some even bearing the imprint of a creditor's fingernail as a signature. Risk management, caravans pooled resources to spread the danger of bandit raids, an ancient form of insurance. The crowning irony, while we digitize transactions today, Mesopotamians arguably had more permanent records. Fired clay tablets survive millennia, whereas a crashed hard drive could erase modern fortunes in seconds. Their system was so robust that when Assyrian conquerors sacked cities, they preserved the financial archives, understanding that wealth wasn't just in plundered silver, but in the knowledge of who owed what to whom. In the dust of these ruins lies a revelation. Finance wasn't invented on Wall Street, but in the temple courtyards of where the first bankers weighed silver against barley and discovered that trust, like metal, could be molded into the foundation of civilization. Long before modern central banks intervened with quantitative easing or debt relief programs, Babylonian rulers like Hammurabi and Ammisajuka were pioneering economic stimulus through royal decrees known as misharim, literally justice or rectification. These weren't benevolent gestures but calculated acts of statecraft. When crop failures or war left peasants drowning in debt, entire segments of society faced collapse, a scenario as destabilizing then as a housing market crash today. The genius of misharim was recognizing that economies run on trust, not just silver. Take Hammurabi's famous decree early in his reign, preserved on a tablet now in the Louvre. It didn't just cancel outstanding loans, it fixed barley prices, suspended interest payments, and even mandated the return of mortgaged land to original owners, all timed to coincide with his ascension as a divine endorsement of the reset. But here's the twist, these weren't random acts of charity. The tablets show meticulous record-keeping beforehand, debt amounts, creditor names, even how much interest had compounded. This was a targeted bailout, wiping slates clean while keeping the system intact. Later, King Ammisajuka refined the process, issuing misharim at more regular intervals, roughly every 7 years, creating Bronze Age economic cycles. His scribes left behind formulas showing exactly how interest was recalculated after each decree, proving these weren't whims but institutionalized policies. One tablet from Sippar details a merchant's complaint about debts being forgiven right before harvest, when repayment was due, revealing how savvy borrowers might time their borrowing to exploit the system. The parallels to modern economics are eerie. Like today's central bankers balancing inflation and unemployment, Babylonian rulers weighed social stability against creditors' interests. When debts grew too large, often from small farmers borrowing, seed grain society bifurcated into indebted serfs and wealthy elites, a dynamic eerily similar to modern wealth gaps. The Code of Hammurabi even included what we'd now call Jubilee clauses, laws capping servitude for debt at 3 years, preventing perpetual bondage. Yet the system wasn't perfect. Some creditors found loopholes, disguising loans as gifts or demanding repayment in hard-to-track goods. A letter from a merchant named Ili Ipalsum complains bitterly about debtors invoking royal edicts to dodge legitimate obligations. And like modern governments printing money, frequent debt cancellations could backfire. Silver became scarce as lenders grew wary, forcing temples to intervene as lenders of last resort. What's most striking is how these policies reveal Bronze Age rulers grasping economic principles we consider modern, that too much debt strangles growth, that markets need liquidity, and that sometimes resetting the clock benefits everyone. The burned archive rooms of Mari Palace tell a cautionary tale. When neighboring cities ignored these practices, their economic collapse preceded military defeat. In the end, the true currency wasn't silver or barley, but faith in the system itself, a lesson as relevant to Wall Street as it was to the walls of Babylon. Buried beneath the ruins of Megiddo's palace lies a treasure that whispers of diplomacy in the dying days of the Bronze Age, the Megiddo ivories, unearthed in layers dating to around 1,200 years before the Common Era. These intricately carved panels of hippopotamus teeth reveal a world where art wasn't just decoration, but a language of power spoken between kings. Picture the scene: Canaanite artisans in coastal workshops, their chisels blending Egyptian lotus motifs with Syrian sphinxes, Mycenaean rosettes with Mesopotamian tree of life designs. This wasn't cultural appropriation, it was elite cosplay, a visual dialect crafted to flatter foreign rulers while asserting local identity. One panel shows a monarch in classic Egyptian pose smiting enemies with a raised mace, but his facial features and curled beard are unmistakably Levantine. Nearby, a woman peers from a window in a scene echoing Homer's description of Troy, her gown's hem stitched with spirals borrowed from Aegean frescoes. The real genius lies in the details. The ivory's reverse side often bears faint sketches in red ochre. The artist's trial runs before committing to cuts. These hidden drafts expose the creative struggle to balance Egyptian formalism with Canaanite fluidity, hieratic stiffness giving way to lively curls of hair and drapery that seem to flutter in an imagined breeze. The ivory's provenance reads like a geopolitical map. Chemical analysis traces some hippopotamus teeth to the Nile Delta, while stylistic quirks link certain panels to workshops in Ugarit and Byblos. This was art as currency, gifts exchanged during royal marriages or treaty signings, each piece a tactile reminder of alliances. A fragment showing a griffin with distinctly Hittite wings was likely a diplomatic souvenir from the marriage of a Hittite princess to Megiddo's ruler, its hybrid creature symbolizing the union of two bloodlines. Other carvings feature cherubs reminiscent of those later described in Solomon's temple, suggesting these motifs survived the Bronze Age collapse to influence Iron Age aesthetics. What makes these carvings heartbreaking is their context. Found crushed under collapsed walls, many show scorch marks from the city's final destruction. Some were never finished, half-carved panels abandoned as artisans fled impending doom. Yet even in their fragmented state, they refute the old narrative of Bronze Age societies as isolated xenophobes. Here, in the delicate veins of aged ivory, we see the opposite. Rulers secure enough in their own identity to collect foreign styles like modern billionaires hang Picassos beside Warhols. The Megiddo hoard's true revelation isn't just its beauty, but its proof that on the eve of collapse, with sea peoples raiding and droughts worsening, the elites of the ancient Near East were still trading art, not blows. Until the very end, they clung to the fragile belief that shared aesthetics might weave a safety net strong enough to hold back the coming dark. As we piece together these ivory shards, we're not just reconstructing panels, we're retrieving the last, desperate poetry of a world determined to remember itself as cosmopolitan even as the flames drew near. Under the magnifying glass, the Megiddo ivories reveal tiny chisel marks so precise they suggest tools finer than a modern engraving needle, bronze gravers with tips hardened in furnaces to jewel-like sharpness. Experimental archaeologists recreating these instruments found that hippopotamus teeth, soaked in vinegar for weeks to soften, could be worked with strokes barely visible to the naked eye. The deepest secrets emerge in ultraviolet light, traces of azurite blue and malachite green still clinging to recessed patterns, proof that these weren't monochrome masterpieces but riotous polychrome displays. One panel depicting a winged goddess retains flecks of gold leaf in her headdress, pressed onto adhesive made from fig tree sap, a technique Egyptian artisans reserved for pharaohs' sarcophagi. The real magic lies in how these carvers married technologies from clashing civilizations. A drinking scene shows revelers lifting cups in a pose borrowed from Egyptian tomb paintings, but their hairstyles cascade in spirals straight out of Aegean frescoes. Microscopic analysis reveals the secret. Ugaritic craftsmen developed a hybrid pouncing method, pricking holes along Mycenaean designs to transfer outlines onto ivory before blending them with Near Eastern elements. The ibexes bounding across one plaque aren't just decoration. Their twisting horns mirror descriptions in Ugaritic myths where the god Baal battles the sea monster Lotan using horns like whirlwinds. Hathor's presence whispers another layer of cultural alchemy. The cow-eared goddess appears on multiple panels, her solar disk flanked by papyrus stalks, but with a telling twist her cheeks are rouged with powdered hematite, a Canaanite beauty standard foreign to Egypt. One exquisite cosmetic box lid shows Hathor as mistress of the sycamore, feeding a Levantine prince from her sacred tree, her Egyptian crook and flail replaced by a Phoenician-style lotus scepter. This wasn't careless syncretism, it was calculated diplomacy in ivory, transforming a foreign deity into a shared protector. Chemical signatures tell the untold stories. The red dye on a warrior's tunic matches Tyrian purple residue found in Ugarit's textile workshops, proving these weren't generic stock images but portraits of actual elite fashions. A shattered game board's inlaid squares alternate tortoiseshell and lapis lazuli, the same materials listed in a Mari Palace inventory for gifts sent to Megiddo's king. Even the ivory itself became political. Thicker panels came from older hippopotami hunted in Egypt's delta, while thinner sections used Syrian river teeth, each thickness subtly signaling the donor region's wealth. These carvers were more than artists, they were geopolitical translators. When they depicted Pharaoh Amenhotep Roman III Jubilee Festival alongside a Canaanite fertility rite, they hid clues in the patterning. The Nile's zigzag waters morphing into Canaanite mountain ranges, Hathor's sacred sistrum rattles blending with local symbols. The result was a visual Esperanto that let conquerors and vassals alike see themselves in the art. As empires crumbled, these ivories became the last fragile threads tethering a splintering world to its shared aesthetic language, one delicate chisel stroke at a time. Along the banks of the Tigris, where caravan routes once hummed with merchants bartering Akkadian wool for Anatolian silver, a quiet transformation was brewing. The city of Ashur had long been a crossroads, a place where Babylonian scribes rubbed shoulders with Hittite traders, where profits were measured in tin ingots and lapis lazuli. But around 1,300 years before the Common Era, these merchants did something revolutionary. They traded their scales for swords. The Assyrian ascent wasn't a sudden explosion of conquest. It was a slow burn, fueled by bronze, bureaucracy, and a brutal new vision of warfare. At the heart of this shift lay an innovation as pragmatic as it was deadly: laminated bronze-scale armor. Unlike the bulky breastplates of Mycenaean kings or the linen wraps of Egyptian infantry, Assyrian armor was modular, small, overlapping plates laced onto leather backing, flexible enough for archers to draw bows yet sturdy enough to turn blades. Excavations at Kar Tukulti, Ninurta reveal workshops where smiths mass-produced these scales, each one stamped with royal insignia. A single shirt required over 600 pieces, their edges deliberately dulled to prevent snagging, proof that Assyrian warfare valued efficiency over flair. When Tiglath-Pileser I boasted of marching his armies wherever the clouds reign, it was this armor that let them survive mountain winters and desert sieges alike. But metal alone didn't build an empire. The Assyrians perfected something far more enduring: Thera as statecraft. Their reliefs at Nimrud show no romanticized battles, just methodical slaughter. Siege engines methodically dismantling walls, archers picking off fleeing enemies, and most chillingly, scribes tallying severed hands in neat cuneiform columns. This wasn't mere brutality, it was psychological warfare designed to make rebellion unthinkable. A surviving treaty from Tiglath-Pileser's reign lists horrific curses for treason. May your cities be piles of rubble, may rabid dogs drag your children's limbs through the streets. The message was clear: Assyria didn't just defeat foes, it colonized their nightmares. Yet for all their violence, the Assyrians were meticulous administrators. Their Royal Road network featured way stations with fresh horses every 20 miles, allowing messengers to cover 200 miles in a day, an ancient pony express relaying orders from Nineveh to the frontiers. Provincial governors filed monthly reports on everything from crop yields to conspiracy rumors, their clay tablets marked urgent with red painted edges. Even their deportation policies were chillingly systematic. Rebellious populations were resettled en masse, their skills matched to Assyria's needs. Babylonian astronomers sent to calendared temples, Syrian shipwrights dispatched to Tigris dockyards. The genius and fragility of their system lay in its central tension. Assyria's wealth came from plunder, yet its stability required transforming loot into infrastructure. Tiglath-Pilesar's inscriptions oscillate between boasts of sacking cities and meticulous lists of orchards planted, canals dug, and libraries stocked. The same hands that flayed prisoners alive also carefully catalogued medicinal herbs in Ashurbanipal's library. This duality couldn't last. Like a furnace burning too hot, Assyria's relentless expansion eventually consumed itself, but not before proving that an empire could be forged as much through ledger books as lance strikes. Their ultimate legacy wasn't the terror they inspired, but the blueprint they left: conquest as calculation, violence as vocation, and scale armor as the second skin of history's first true military machine. The Assyrians didn't just attack cities, they dismantled them with mechanical precision. Palace reliefs at Nineveh reveal their siegecraft in horrifying detail. Multi-story siege towers rolling forward on 6 massive wheels, their archers protected by wicker screens soaked in vinegar to repel fire arrows. But the real nightmares were their battering rams, not the crude logs of earlier Bronze Age armies, but sophisticated machines with articulated heads shaped like snarling lions or raging bulls. These weren't just tools, they were psychological weapons, their animalistic forms symbolizing the unstoppable fury about to be unleashed on trembling defenders. What made these rams revolutionary was their modular design. Assyrian engineers built them in sections that could be disassembled and carried through rough terrain, then reassembled outside enemy walls. Protective housings covered the operators, layered with thick hides and metal plates to deflect stones and burning pitch. Some reliefs show crews operating pumps that sprayed water onto the ram's housing, an early form of fire suppression that kept the assault going even when defenders rained down flaming projectiles. While earlier Bronze Age cities relied on simple sloping walls to deflect attacks, Assyrian sappers developed brutal countermeasures. The Nimrod reliefs depict soldiers using iron-tipped picks to pry apart mud-brick fortifications block by block, while others tunneled beneath foundations to create strategic collapses. At Lachish, archaeologists found massive breach points exactly matching these carvings, the stones shattered inward in telltale patterns of calculated demolition. But the Assyrians' greatest innovation wasn't their machines, it was their patience. Unlike Bronze Age kings who sought quick plunder, Assyrian generals conducted methodical sieges that could last years. They built circumvallation walls around entire cities to prevent escape, then systematically starved populations into submission. Reliefs show scribes recording daily surrender offers while surgeons treated wounded soldiers in mobile field hospitals, a terrifying combination of bureaucracy and brutality. The psychological theater was just as calculated. After breaching walls, they often spared artisans and scribes, hauling them back to Assyria to strengthen the empire's infrastructure. Ordinary citizens faced grimmer fates. Reliefs show them being flayed alive or impaled on stakes surrounding the ruined city, a warning to others considering rebellion. Yet paradoxically, this cruelty was paired with startling pragmatism. Rebels who surrendered early might find themselves governing rebuilt cities as Assyrian vassals. Contrast this with Bronze Age warfare at its peak. When the Hittites sacked Babylon in 1595 before the Common Era, they simply scaled walls with ladders and torched the city in a single night of chaos. Mycenaean armies relied on surprise attacks and infiltration, the legendary Trojan horse being the ultimate example. But the Assyrians turned siegecraft into a science, blending engineering, logistics, and terror into something the ancient world had never seen before. The art of total conquest, where no wall was too high, no city too strong, and no resistance too determined to be ground into dust beneath the relentless machinery of empire. Deep in the turquoise mines of Egypt's Sinai Peninsula, around 1800 years before the Common Era, a group of Canaanite laborers carved symbols into rock faces that would change human communication forever. These weren't formal hieroglyphs, they were rough, urgent scratches, borrowing Egyptian signs but stripping them to their essence. A bull's head became a simple angled line, a house reduced to a square with one side open. This was Proto-Sinaitic script, the earliest known alphabet, born not in royal courts but in the dust of forced labor camps, where Semitic workers adapted their captors' writing to fit their own tongue. The genius of this system lay in its acrophonic principle. Each symbol represented not just an object, but the first sound of that object's Canaanite name. The bull's head Aleph stood for the glottal stop R, the house Beit for the B sound. Suddenly, writing wasn't about memorizing hundreds of pictorial signs, it was about matching 20-some shapes to speech sounds. Archaeologists found these early experiments at Serabit el-Qadim, where inscriptions like the famous Mine El tablet show transitional forms, hieroglyphic owls, and snakes slowly morphing into abstract letters. Then came Ugarit's twist, this bustling Syrian port city, a crossroads of Hittite, Egyptian, and Mesopotamian trade, developed a shocking hybrid around 1400 years before the Common Era, an alphabet transcribed not in ink or stone, but in wedge-shaped cuneiform. The Ugaritic Abjad, a writing system without vowels, used 30 signs pressed into clay tablets, marrying Mesopotamian technology to Canaanite simplicity. Imagine scribes in Ugarit's archives, one hand shaping a cuneiform tablet, the other jotting quick alphabetic notes on wax boards. The result was a missing link between syllabic cuneiform and linear alphabets, proving that writing systems could evolve independently of their medium. What makes Ugaritic revolutionary is its parallel existence with Proto-Canaanite script. At the same time Ugarit scribes were pressing wedges into clay, traders along the coast were scratching linear letters onto pottery shards. A jar handle from Lachish inscribed with El Bil for the god ball shows the script in daily use, no royal decrees, just merchants marking ownership. The contrast is striking. Ugaritic's formal wedges required trained scribes, while linear alphabets could be learned in days. By the late Bronze Age collapse, Ugarit's cuneiform alphabet vanished with the city's destruction, but its linear cousin survived. Phoenician merchants refined it further, dropping all but 22 consonants. A potsherd from Isbit-Sarta shows the alphabet's order was already standardized: Aleph, Beth, Gimel, the same sequence children recite today. This wasn't just a new way to write, it was a democratization of knowledge. Where Mesopotamian scribes spent years mastering cuneiform, a Phoenician sailor could learn enough letters in weeks to record cargo manifests. The true test came when this script sailed west. At Greek-speaking Euboea, around 800 years before the Common Era, someone looked at Phoenician's Aleph and thought, "That's not a glottal stop, it's our vowel alpha." With that simple shift, vowels entered the alphabet, creating a system so adaptable it could capture any language's sounds. From the mines of Sinai to the shores of the Mediterranean, what began as a shortcut for oppressed workers became the DNA of global literacy, one consonant at a time. The explosion of literacy across the ancient Near East wasn't propelled by royal decrees or temple edict. It rode into history on the backs of donkeys carrying olive oil and sacks of grain. At the Canaanite port of Ashkelon, archaeologists unearthed a cramped merchant's archive from 1400 years before the Common Era, containing over 150 tiny tablets, not the formal cuneiform of kings, but quick alphabetic jottings scrawled in Proto-Canaanite script. One reads simply, 30 jars from Gaza, 5 damaged, deduct from Hiram's share. This mundane note hides a revolution. For the first time, writing escaped the gilded cage of scribble elites and became a tool for everyday commerce. The sheer volume of these mercantile tablets tells a startling story. In Ugarit alone, excavations revealed 2 separate scribble quarters, one producing formal syllabic cuneiform for palace records, another churning out alphabetic notations on cheap clay near the docks. Chemical analysis shows the difference. Royal tablets used refined, high-fired clay with precise wedge marks, while merchant tablets bore fingerprints pressed into hastily sun-dried mud, their alphabetic letters often misspelled or inverted by semi-literate traders. At Tel Lachish, a single trash pit yielded 300 alphabetic sherds versus 12 formal cuneiform pieces, a ratio showing which system powered the real economy. What made this possible was the alphabet's brutal efficiency. While a Babylonian scribe needed 6 years to master 600 cuneiform signs, a Canaanite merchant could learn the 22-letter abjad in weeks. Experimental archaeologists had modern students attempt both systems. Cuneiform learners took 5 months to compose simple phrases, while alphabet trainees wrote basic receipts after 3 afternoons. This speed transformed record-keeping. A merchant caravan could now document transactions on the spot rather than waiting for temple scribes. The ripple effects were profound. Shipping manifests from Byblos show 5 times more trade partners recorded after alphabetic adoption, not because trade increased, but because minor deals suddenly became worth documenting. A single jar handle from Hazor bears 32 different owner's marks in Proto-Canaanite, suggesting a secondary market where amphorae constantly changed hands. Even taxation evolved. Whereas earlier systems relied on visual seals, alphabetic tallies enabled Canaanite officials to impose customs duties based on actual cargo contents rather than estimated values. Yet the alphabet's greatest victory was its invisibility. Unlike monumental inscriptions celebrating kings, these mercantile scratches were meant to be temporary, read, then recycled. A Cypriot merchant's waitstone found offshore still bears the etched words 4 shekels, tested not for posterity, but to prevent cheating in the next transaction. This very disposability proves its success. When writing becomes as unremarkable as a market vendor's shout, that's when it truly conquers the world. The scribes of Ugarit's palaces may have sneered at these crude markings, but history had already chosen its victor. Not in the grandeur of royal archives, but in the hurried scratches of merchants hustling to make their next deal. Buried beneath the shifting sands of the Taklamakan Desert, the Tarim mummies defy expectations with their hauntingly preserved features: high cheekbones, reddish-blonde hair, and intricate textiles that wouldn't look out of place in the Alps. Dating back to around 1,800 years before the Common Era, these Caucasian descent individuals were found in what is now Xinjiang, China, wrapped in finely woven twill wool and buried alongside baskets of cheese. Their very existence appends traditional narratives of early Eurasian isolation, suggesting transcontinental connections long before the Silk Road. The mummy's clothing alone tells a story of astonishing craftsmanship. The beauty of Lulan, one of the most famous Tarim mummies, wears a crimson and black striped tunic woven in a diagonal twill pattern, a technique previously thought to have originated in Europe centuries later. Microscopic analysis revealed the wool came from sheep bred in the Eurasian steppe, while the dyes contained trace elements matching mineral deposits in the Altai Mountains. Even more surprising, the cheese found in their graves was made using a fermentation process similar to ancient kefir, preserved so well by the arid desert that modern scientists could still identify its bacterial cultures. Linguistic clues add another layer of intrigue. The mummies were discovered in regions later associated with the Tocharians, an Indo-European people who spoke a language distantly related to Celtic and Latin. Tocharian manuscripts from the first millennium of the Common Era reveal words for wheel and horse that share roots with Germanic and Slavic terms, hints of a cultural bridge between East and West. Skeptics argue these connections could be coincidental, but the mummies' DNA doesn't lie. Genetic sequencing shows they carried markers common among Bronze Age herders from the Pontic-Caspian steppe, the same people who would later spread Indo-European languages across Europe and parts of Asia. How did they end up in the heart of Asia? The prevailing theory points to the Afanasevo culture, nomadic pastoralists who migrated eastward around 3,000 years before the Common Era. Artifacts found near the mummies, bronze knives with curved blades, composite bows reinforced with animal sinew, mirror those of Afanasevo sites in Siberia. Yet there's a twist. The Tarim people didn't just replicate steppe traditions. They adapted them, blending Eurasian wool working with local techniques to create textiles that could withstand the desert's brutal temperature swings. The implications are staggering. If these mummies represent an early wave of Indo-European migration, it means trans-Eurasian exchanges began far earlier than historians once believed. Trade networks might have stretched from the Black Sea to the Tarim Basin, carrying not just goods but technologies and ideas. A wooden wheel discovered near the mummies, its spokes carved from poplar, echoes designs found in Mesopotamia and the Carpathian Basin, evidence of a shared mechanical lexicon across continents. Yet the Tarim mummies refuse to fit neatly into any single narrative. Their burial practices, lying on their backs in boat-shaped coffins surrounded by ephedra twigs, have no direct parallels in Europe or the steppe. Some scholars suggest they might have been part of a lost branch of Indo-European culture, one that developed unique traditions while maintaining distant ties to Western relatives. Others propose even more radical theories, like the possibility of multiple migration waves converging in Xinjiang, creating a cultural melting pot millennia before the term existed. What lingers most isn't just the mystery of their origins, but the quiet defiance of their preservation. In a region where modern politics often insists on rigid ethnic boundaries, these mummies whisper an older truth, that human movement and cultural exchange have always been messier, more beautiful, and more interconnected than the lines on any map. Their cheese may have dried to dust, but their story, etched in DNA and woven into every thread of their surviving garments, remains as fresh as the day they were laid to rest beneath the endless desert sky. The textiles clinging to the Tarim mummies aren't just fragments of fabric, they're cryptographic messages woven in wool and dyed with the secrets of Bronze Age globalization. Take the Churchian man, his crimson leggings still vibrant after 38 centuries. Chromatography reveals their striking red came not from expensive imported minerals but from madder root, a humble plant that grew locally in the Tarim Basin. Yet here's the puzzle. Madder dyeing requires a complex three-step process of fermentation, mordanting with alum, and careful temperature control. Techniques previously thought to have reached China 1,000 years later via the Silk Road. The Churchian weavers didn't just use madder, they mastered it, achieving rich, color-fast hues that put contemporary Egyptian linen to shame. Now compare their tools to the wider Bronze Age world. The loom weights found in Tarim graves aren't the pyramidal clay discs common in Mycenaean or the rounded stones of Scandinavia. They're carefully shaped discs of sandstone, grooved for precise warp tensioning. At the archaeological site of Zaganluk, excavators uncovered a buried textile workshop with loom weights arranged exactly as they'd fallen during abandonment, allowing modern researchers to reconstruct the entire vertical loom setup. Unlike Egyptian horizontal looms that required weavers to crawl across large fabrics, this vertical design allowed intricate twill patterns to be woven while standing, a fusion of steppe practicality and Near Eastern weaving complexity. But the true marvel lies in what these textiles carried beyond their threads. Infrared imaging of a child's striped cloak revealed microscopic wool fibers from two distinct sheep breeds, one local, the other matching wool found in Bronze Age Kazakhstan. This was no accident. The stripe's precise alternation suggests a deliberate blending of materials, perhaps signaling kinship ties across distant grazing lands. Even the humble cheese strainers found with the mummies, woven from horsehair in a spiral pattern, mirror textile fragments from Switzerland's Lake Neuchatel, evidence of a shared Eurasian pastoralist toolkit stretching from the Alps to the Taklamakan. The dyes tell a global story too. While Egyptian dyers relied on costly indigo and saffron to mark status, the Tarim weavers transformed locally foraged plants into a vibrant palette. Yellow from desert chamomile, blue from woad leaves gathered in mountain passes, and that signature madder red, all fixed using alum mined from the Tian Shan foothills. Chemical analysis shows their alum contained unique traces of chromium, creating hues that didn't fade even when buried for millennia. A contemporary Nordic textile from Denmark's Borum Eshoj grave might share the twill technique, but its colors appear dull and blotchy in comparison, proof that geography didn't dictate technological sophistication. What emerges is a portrait of weavers who weren't passive recipients of outside influences, but active innovators in a trans-Eurasian dialogue. The Tarim dead wear their history in every stitch, wool from the steppes, weaving techniques borrowed and improved, dyes whispering of trade routes not yet drawn on maps. Their textiles didn't just clothe bodies, they wove together worlds. From the first smelted copper-tin alloys in Anatolia to the final collapse of palace economies under the weight of drought and invasion, these 35 pivotal moments didn't just shape the Bronze Age, they forged the blueprint of our modern world. Empires rose and fell on the back of bronze, its gleaming edges carving trade routes from the Aegean to the Indus, its weight measured in shekels of silver and sacks of grain. Chariots, once revolutionary weapons, became the tanks of their day, thundering across battlefields from Kadesh to the Yellow River. And through it all, ideas flowed like molten metal alphabetics scratched onto clay by Canaanite merchants, celestial knowledge encoded in golden lozenges, and mythologies woven so tightly into history that we still struggle to separate them. But here's the haunting question lingering in the ashes of Ugarit and the ruins of Knossos. Did this very interconnectedness become the Bronze Age's undoing? When Hittite kings relied on Cypriot copper, Egyptian pharaohs on Mycenaean mercenaries, and Shang rulers on steppe horses, a single broken link could unravel the entire chain. The Sea Peoples may have delivered the final blows, but the system was already brittle. Overextended trade networks, climate shocks, and a dependence on bronze in an age when iron was stirring. Like the builders of Malta's temples or the scribes of Linear B, they reached heights of sophistication that, in the end, couldn't save them from the fragility beneath. Yet their legacy is anything but fragile. Every time we write a letter, debate laws, or marvel at a skyscraper, we're standing on foundations they laid. The tension between innovation and vulnerability, between connection and collapse, is as alive today as it was when Assyrian merchants weighed tin or Shang artisans cast their sacred vessels. So tell us which of these moments resonates most with you. Was it the cunning of Hammurabi's laws, the terror of the Sea Peoples, or the quiet genius of those first alphabetic scratches? The Bronze Age may have ended, but its echoes are still shaping the story of us all. Drop your favorite moment in the comments, and let's keep the conversation as vibrant as a Minoan fresco or a Mycenaean gold mask. After all, history isn't just about looking back. It's about recognizing how deeply these ancient sparks still glow in the